Stillman is one of the small outcomes. Project structures. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff on one side of it, but if these things also happen, you can't count on it because that's kind of what it's a whole suite, there's kind of a portfolio of things you can do. It's hard to, that's just the way one emergency can do it.
Great, how you doing today?
Okay, 10 a.m. Let's start the Home Rule Advisory Group meeting. It's September 21st here in CC8. Thank you for everyone who's shown up on time. Great turnout. We'll call this meeting to order, and we'll start off by checking to see who we have on the phone. Chris, are you there from ARB? Guess not. Bill Quinn said he couldn't make it. Janet, are you there? See, are we on the phone?
Yeah. There are 5 people there.
There are.
And
I think they mute us?
no, we're open.
Jane Joy, Eastern Municipal Water District.
And
EPA is going to be here and Amy's going to be here physically
do you
here.
know who's with us thus far?
Anyone? Can anyone on the phone hear us?
Yeah, I was about to say.
Doesn't sound like it.
RTA was on. Is that a new
Is that who was doing the typing?
Hi, this
Is that the new administration?
is Downton. We're here at the RTA office.
Okay.
Larry, was that you?
Mike Downs. I'm at the RTA office.
Okay. And Roche, are
Mary
you?
will not be attending.
I missed that. Did you hear what that was? Can you repeat that, please?
Larry Rubio will not be attending today,
Okay.
but we do have a guest, Mike Downs, who is attending.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks, Mike, for joining. And Roshang at SCAG, are you there? So on the phone, I only have Riverside Transit Agency location as far as I can tell. Anyone else on the phone? Okay. You said there were 5 people on.
Chris Gallenstein with CARB.
Ah, Chris, great. Thank you. All right, well, we'll see.
Did you guys misbehave because there's no more food?
No, we get closer to noon, it'll show up.
Oh, okay.
Will it be ours this time or somebody else's?
No, last time it was
We
ours.
were eating into somebody else's food.
If you remember correctly, here's the deal that we struck. That we would meet less often, but for longer, and we would throw in lunch. So that's I think that's a pretty good deal for all of us. And let's see. So the one thing I wanted to mention in my opening comments is that every member of the Home Rule Advisory Group is eligible for 1 ticket to the Clean Air Awards on October 7th. It's not going to be in downtown Los Angeles as it traditionally is. We're actually going to be out at Riverside at the convention center, right? Yeah. So we're meeting. The board meeting will be at the Mission Inn, right?
I think
Or
it's
no?
the other way.
The other way.
Yeah, the Clean Air Awards is at Mission, and the
Okay.
meeting is at the convention center.
No, it's reversed.
It's reversed?
Yes, the board meeting is at the Riverside Mission Inn.
Okay.
Clean Air Awards are at the convention center.
Well, they're only a couple blocks from each other,
Yeah.
so you should be able to find one or both. But if you'd like to come to the awards, you should let us know. And if you'd like to purchase tickets, they're $40, and you're more than welcome to buy all the tickets you want. But that's coming up on October 7th. And I'm not sure if any of you are getting an award this year, but if not, you'll have to nominate yourself next year. Let's see, so the other thing on the agenda is that Amy Zimper from EPA is supposed to come and actually join us here. And when she does, we're gonna move her up on the agenda so that she can get to our next meeting if we don't get to her first. So that's it in terms of opening comments. And our acting executive officer, Wayne Nastry, is joining us because he saw that we had more exciting things on our agenda. Wayne, anything you'd like to add?
Just say I'm very much looking forward to hearing about the discussion items and seeing how we can continue to utilize your good input to improve our operations and customer service.
There you go. Okay, so minutes, item number 2. Were there any comments, questions, corrections, addenda? I'm looking at you, Bill.
I know.
And I guess I'm kind of confused. Ann did her usual excellent job on reporting on the minutes. I guess where I'm a little confused is with the proposal or suggestion I made on the mission statement for home rule.
Uh-huh.
And
Is that on the agenda for today too?
yeah.
After lunch,
And I guess I can defer my comments on that because it isn't quite what I had in mind, but obviously it's what you had in mind as the chair, so.
Yeah, my recollection is it was a little unresolved, which is why we're carrying it over and having another
Okay,
conversation.
other than that, I have no comment on
Okay.
minutes. So.
Great. Anyone else? Other than our resident minute comment person? Okay, so we're gonna consider the minutes approved then, which I do unilaterally because we have people on the phone not to go through individually, which council has said is okay. And Bill, I thought you weren't gonna be here today.
Yes, I'm able to be here.
That's great.
Barbara has other things to do. I can sit in my phone. I am not gonna be.
Looking around for Philip. Not this one. Oh, there we go. That one. I knew I saw you someplace. Okay, I assume there's no public comment on item 2, the minutes. And we'll move on to legislative update, which should be a little entertaining since we have the end of session. All right?
It can be. As you know, that we've taken a different approach on Ledge Committee and we provide more written reports. So I would definitely encourage you all to look at the Ledge Committee packet or that's provided with those special reports that are included. Some of the updates that were included and provided at the meeting, starting on the federal level. We were given more of a general description on some of the larger funding issues that are facing Congress this year. And that includes a number of departmental transportation grants announcements and basically announcing some of the monies awarded. And some of that was Fast Lane Grant Program and the Tiger Discretionary Grant Program. We also got an update on talking about how the first conference committee on the energy bill, which is that energy bill that's been hanging around in DC for quite a while now. And so the first official conference meeting between the House and Senate members did take place. Basically, they're working to work out issues and merge the House and the Senate version of the bills into an agreeable joint package. They were hoping to get one more meeting before the October recess. Also, it was reported that staff is working with our consultants to have a visit of congressional staff to AQMD, basically to get a tour of the region, also a tour of the headquarters, and kind of discuss, AQMP issues and some of the other issues that we're dealing with, and in a way to kind of continue to build those relationships with the congressional staff. So we'll be working on that. There was also an update on the latest in FY 2017 appropriations bills. And it's reported to be unlikely. There's been development since our Ledge Committee meeting. But basically, there is a full extension of the budget is not likely to happen. Instead, there'll be a continuing resolution, and the debate has been how long it's going to be extended through. Basically, at the meeting, it was reported that it would either be through December 9th or December 16th. Although there were some conservative House members that were pushing for possibly having the continuing resolution extend all the way through early 2017. And that basically means that, the funding is essentially the same levels as it was for the previous budget. It's kind of just like kicking the can down the road a little bit, and then they'll come back probably in a lame duck session to try to finalize the budget. Also, there was an update provided on the progress of the EPA petition for rulemaking for ultra-low NOx emissions for heavy-duty trucks, and reported that the effort remains on track, and encouraging communications have been received by EPA regarding the possibility of timely rulemaking, so we'll stay in touch with EPA and hopefully things will continue moving forward. At the state level, there was some discussion about greenhouse gas reduction fund monies. Obviously, there was and it's just detailed more on some of the reports that are provided, but about $900 million in funds were actually released out of the GGRF fund, and that's been years coming along for actually having a deal done. And some key monies that would actually be benefiting AQMD. There's money for the Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program. Also $150 million for heavy-duty diesel, or heavy-duty trucks, and it can be, replacing diesel, or it wasn't specified specifically on how that money would be spent, but that is something that could definitely benefit the South Coast. And there was also CVRP money and some other options. So we're going to continue to pursue that and try to see if we can get our fair share for the South Coast region. Also discussed, there was over 800 bills sent to the governor at the end of the legislative session, and he's about to the end of September to respond, to act. He's either going to veto, sign, or take no action, and usually taking no action basically means the bill does take effect. And two key bills, AB 197 by Eduardo Garcia and SB 32 by Senator Pavley, which were connected together, they call it double joined, were both signed into law by the governor recently. And one of the key things that does is basically solidifies in state law the extension of the climate change reduction timelines. It would be 40% below 1990 levels by now 2030. That extends the 2020 rule. So that was those were both controversial bills, and a lot of debate was going back and forth, but they did get passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor on September 8th. Also, a reference was made, though, despite the fact that the deadlines have been extended for greenhouse gas reduction, the cap and trade program still, it was reported, remains, a little bit in flux. Right now, it's only authorized through 2020. There's also been a lawsuit filed by the California Chamber of Commerce, challenging the validity of that program. So there's a lot of things that remain in flux. The legislature only dealt with extending the deadlines. It didn't deal with reauthorizing the cap and trade program. And the governor is committed to try to move forward on that and potentially even going to the ballot for a statewide ballot initiative to possibly extend the program if needed. One of the final things reported also, I think I made a reference to the EFMP program. That was $80 million that was allocated for that program, and that'll be, again, it was not specified who would be getting that, but we'll be working to get our fair share. Those are kind of the key updates that were provided at the meeting. As I said, there's additional content in the actual Ledge Committee packet reports, so I'm open to have any questions.
Questions or comments? None. Anyone on the phone? Members of the public? You got off easy. Okay, Philip, thanks a lot for that update tomorrow.
All right, so much.
There you go. Okay, so Amy's here in person, it's so lovely. We're gonna skip to your item, so I understand you have a meeting to get to. So we're gonna go to item number 7, which is EPA and federal activities. We'll take that. Oops, this pen fell apart. They've been doing that to me all week. I was wondering if it was this one that's doing it.
First off,
Go ahead.
Dr. Liu, thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Zimfer. I know some of you I do not know. I'm an associate director at the US EPA's Air Division. And you may or may not know that Deborah Jordan, who was previously our Air Division director, has moved into the acting deputy regional administrator role as we've had, we're going through the last phases of this administration. We're moving into the new administration. So with Deborah Jordan moving into that role, Elizabeth Adams, you may know her because she's been the EPA person you've probably either seen or heard the most at your committee here. She is now our acting division director for the Air Division. So she asked me to take on her role as the geographic associate director lead for the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the area here. And I couldn't be more thrilled about it. I've been at EPA for many years, worked with Wayne when he was our August regional administrator. And recently, some of my foci have been clean energy and climate change, in addition advocating very much for the advancement and full deployment of clean technology, primarily in the mobile source sector. So it seems to dovetail nicely with the proposed air quality management plan that is out for review from South Coast. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to work with everyone on the mobile side. I've also had pretty extensive experience working with the energy sectors and on refining and other aspects. So again, some of you I know, but that's me. I'm really happy to be here. I probably won't be able to be here in person that often, but I thought I would take the opportunity for my first meeting to come in person and to be here and to meet you all. You can get my contact information from the South Coast staff, or I'm happy to give you my card after the session today. Just a few things to update folks on, and please ask any questions. I asked my colleagues, what are the type of things that you're most interested in? Well, of course, we're at the end of this administration, so there are a few actions that are coming to final fruition. You may have seen that we did finalize the heavy-duty greenhouse gas rulemaking for the phase 2 most recently, and Phil or Philip?
Philip.
Philip,
He'll be Phil and I'll be
Phil, yeah, no Phil, but I don't just had an opportunity to review Philip. So he mentioned the petition that you all have presented to EPA for the next round of heavy-duty NOx regulation. We did receive significant comment through the greenhouse gas rulemaking. However, we could not take action on that at this point in time because that was a greenhouse gas rulemaking. But we did take the comments very seriously. And I do know for a fact, working closely with Chris Grundler, who's the person that heads our Office of Transportation and Air Quality, that they're very interested in the comments that were presented by many different parties. Incidentally, I should mention that Chris and one of his division directors, Carl Simon, will actually be in the South Coast area the middle part of October. Wayne, I think you'll be joining us. There are some community folks that have formed a group called Moving Forward Network, and they want to take us on a tour of goods movement in the South Coast, and to the extent that that is somewhat a surrogate for goods movement in the country. So we're really very much looking forward to that as we grapple with goods movement as a comprehensive issue, but very specifically how trucks and locomotives and other heavy-duty mobile sources are a component of that. We recently, just a few days ago, finalized a rulemaking on exceptional events and what those packages look like. I could talk a little bit about that. There have been fires throughout the state. They continue, and we're working with a lot of our districts in California on what impact that's having to air quality and tracking that pretty closely, and then how that might link up with attainment status. And then just the final thing that I'll mention, and then again, I'd be happy to take any questions. We did recently finalize a rule for what is required in PM 2.5 state implementation plans, and that's been a very long time in coming. And we have some now clarity on what is required, especially when it comes to things like precursors to PM 2.5. So I'll pause there. A lot of other things are going on, and I'm open to questions. So thank you for inviting me to come and participate.
Thanks for that update. Someone has to have a question for Amy before I start in with all of mine. Art, go ahead.
The question I always bring up is, and I seen it this morning, the biggest, correct me if I'm wrong, but the ones that contribute the largest to the pollution in the area is the port and the rails. I believe it's close to 40–50%, isn't it?
Well, you know.
I don't know, I'm just asking.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, Phil could probably answer that, or other folks from the South Coast even in more
Who
detail
had to put the emission inventory together. And
right. And I would note that that is one of the reasons why I emphasize the importance of
The problem I see is that you have the small businesses, and especially the constituencies and the groups that I work with. We work with groups, and we've seen a flight of businesses that leave, and then the small businesses, the ones that have the auto body shops, the ones that have the spray booths, you know, they account for, like, if you look at this thing like this, they're down like here. And the ones that you regulate are here. And they're given, which I'm looking at as an inadequate imbalance. And there's no parity in the ability to make corrections. Where here, this group that accounts to 40–50% is given 10, 20 years because maybe they buy enough lunches for enough congressmen in Washington and enough tables at enough of these functions to regulate that. The people that I work with, you know, they have enough trouble just trying to make the next paycheck and the next bill. So why is the inequity and the imparity there where they can't? And I see these when you go to East LA, you go to the areas that the minorities live, and we're the ones that suffer from that contamination. We're losing the jobs. We have all these vacant buildings. We have all of this. Yet these other industries enjoy, because of their affluence in Washington, the ability to get another 10 years or 20 years to come up with the technology. But some poor factory like I saw today is trying to make tacos or tamales or whatever for Costco, for all the affluent people that can't cook in South County or the other Anaheim Hills or whatever, go to Costco and buy those things. They can enjoy that. And they drive the nice cars, the Mercedes with all the knocks and stuff. And yet the other businesses are getting hammered. Why the inequities? Why the imbalances?
May I make just a point of order?
Sure.
We forgot to do self-introductions, and
We
maybe
did.
it might be helpful.
I-
People who
yeah,
don't know.
I'm-
Yeah,
yeah.
we should do that, especially since Amy's here, and I'm so sorry that I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And everyone knows me, I'm Joe Liu, I'm the governor's appointee on the board. Phil, why don't you go ahead and we'll quickly go around.
Yeah, Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules Division at AQMD.
Bill Wong with General Counsel's Office at the AQMD.
Matt Miyasato, Deputy Executive Officer for Science and Technology Advancement here in Southwest.
Bill Van Amberg from CalSTAR to Clean Transportation Coalition.
I'm Larry Smith, the guy who didn't turn his phone off.
We'll remember Larry.
Golly, never happens.
Well,
Won't
you're
turn
not
off.
asking for milk.
There. Sorry about that, I apologize.
Yeah, I'm Mark Montes, I'm with AM International, but I also work with LULAC and MALDEF, and we're like the top litigators on education. We're now moving into the environmental issues, water, air, and as we look at these, we see all these inequities. That's why the question. And Bill.
I'm Bill Lamar, I'm the Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
David Rothbart, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts.
Philip Crabb, Community Relations Manager with Legislative Public Affairs. I work mostly on state and federal legislation.
Tyron Turner, Dakota Communications.
Noel Moica with Southern California Gas.
Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance.
Sue Gornick with Western States Petroleum Association.
All right, AQMD technical staff.
Ann Scagliola, AQMD Planning.
Wayne Nastri, Acting Excel.
Maybe we've introduced you. And on the phone, I believe we have Chris Gallagher, right?
Chris Gallenstein, ARB.
Okay, Gallagher, I'm sorry. And who else do we have on the phone?
Jane.
This is Rongshan Loa, Southern California Association of Governments.
Hi, Roshan. Glad you could join us. Jane, I heard you?
Yeah, Jane Joy, Eastern Municipal Water District.
Okay, and then we had someone at Riverside Transit. Who was that again?
Mike Downs with Downs Energy.
Oh, hi, Mike. How are you?
Dr. Liu?
Yes.
Also at ARB is Tung Lee. He's the manager for the Project Assistance Section, and Joe Fisher, who's working on the oil and gas rig.
Oh, great, great. Okay, so.
This is Winky Tex at EPA Region 9 as well.
Oh, thank you. So Amy, we're not going to let you get away with not answering Art's questions, so.
Let me go back.
It was,
We see the inequities, but yet when we see the remedies and the mitigation, we never see any of that money go there. And one of the things that we just saw with the cap and trade, the governor taking $500,000, putting it into a fast train thing. We saw another $300 million where I don't see a rainy day fund because, you know, why should we wait for it to rain dollars in our community for social economic justice issues in those communities? So why the imbalance? What can we see from Washington leadership that'll take care of some of those inequities? I hate to hit those questions, but
Yeah.
normally I deal with you guys over some phone thing there.
No, I thought I'd come in person. First off, I thank you for the question and really appreciate the concerns that you're representing.
Well, the
I will-
concerns, we go to concerns and later, we're gonna end up like half of the other organizations that say the spotted owls. We're gonna end up in litigation.
Yeah, well, so just a few things, and then again, I might ask my colleagues at the South Coast District on how they approach rulemaking and so forth. But at the federal level, there are a couple ways that small business concerns factor into our national rulemaking. Anytime we establish a standard or a new performance requirement, we have to go through a cost effectiveness analysis. And we take a look at the full spectrum of sources for any particular industry. And we look at what's economical. And that does factor into our technology standards. So that's one way that we take into consideration what the size of a business is. We also have a provision where the regulations apply differently if you're a major source or a large source of pollution, if you're a stationary source, a factory or what have you, versus if you're a small. If you're a minor source, there are much less stringent requirements if you're only polluting at a certain amount. And these all then get further refined and tailored to the particular geographic area, in this case in the South Coast. So that's how it's, there are many small business considerations for the stationary source side. When you look at what you first mentioned, which is what is the largest source of pollution in the South Coast, for example? Where is the area that's going to need to be targeted for reductions to bring clean air into the area? You do take a look at, collectively, we, on the regulatory side, take a look at what are the highest sources of emissions, and then what are the measures that can be put into place to bring down those reductions. So in the case of South Coast, many collectively of the largest sources are some at the ports, ships, some of the trains that go in and out of the ports, some of the trucks, et cetera. And those are conducive, from the federal side, we regulate new engines. So we recognize there's going to be a need for accelerating the turnover of those fleets because it's going to be done on a voluntary basis. So actually Wayne was the individual that really got the agency first in Region 9 and then nationally to begin the West Coast Collaborative, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but that was the program that led to the National Diesel Emission Reduction Act. And that provides incentive funding, which you're probably familiar with.
It's about this thick.
Yeah, I know, well, it's the federal budget and, you know, we can look at what's going to be needed, but that's been augmented here in the state by large infusion of funding, you know, provided by the taxpayer, various propositions, et cetera. So that's, those incentive dollars are targeted to places where we think the biggest emission reductions can happen for the expenditure of funds, and we look at leveraging dollars. So we're hoping that that continues and can actually expand. We also provide some funding for doing research on more advanced technology. Then just the last comment I think I heard in your statement about communities and the concern about communities that may be overburdened from sources or in and around some of these large either factories or refineries or the ports, for example. And we do recognize the very strong importance of identifying the communities where there are perhaps overburdened areas and try to target some of our work there. So I mentioned that we're going to be down in the South Coast area and going on a tour.
My question is the concerns, you identify it, and it's like an injury, you identify a broken arm or an infection. How do you plan to mitigate it?
Well, as I said, I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach, having targeted reductions on the stationary side. In the case of that here in South Coast, there's been significant control over the years. Many of the stationary sources have the most highest achievable control technology that's available. So a lot of it here in the South Coast is about the mobile sources and working to turn over the full fleet and providing incentive funding for that.
Maybe I could add a little bit to
Okay,
that, if
so-
you don't mind.
Well, it's Wayne, Phil, and I've got some comments too, so go ahead.
So the fact of the matter is, EPA has to deal with the authority that was granted to it by Congress. And so the planes, trains, and ships are reserved for the federal government to regulate. And so to the extent that the agency has the authority to do things, they are doing it. As Amy talked about, she talked about developing new regulations for engines. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at shipping, the United States can do US flagged vessels, but the United States has to work with the International Maritime Organization. That's why we worked so hard to develop the ratification of Annex 6, so that from an international perspective, all ships that would come into the US would have to be considered of an emission control area. But that was an effort that we had to go to Congress. You're raising issues where EPA has limited authority to take those kind of mitigation measures. And that type of impact is the main reason why when we submitted our petition, we didn't submit it just as South Coast Air Quality Management District. We've got many other states. We've got many other local agencies. And the rationale for that is that Congress listens. And I can't tell you how many times when I was regional administrator and I'd walk into a congressional office in DC, I'd say, "Hi, I'm Wayne Nastri from California, Region 9, and they'd say, "Get out. We don't want to hear anything from California. You guys are crazy." So the bottom line was I never went in anymore after that and said, "I'm from California." We'd go in with our partners from Nevada, from Arizona, from other states, and said, "We've got serious concerns that Congress needs to address." And EPA cannot lobby. EPA cannot say, "Wow, we really need to fix this and you need to give us the authority." And that's where organizations such as yours, such as us, can actually go into Congress and say, "We have a problem." Now, when we talked about the petition that we submitted, the ultra-low NOx petition, what we were able to do in getting those other states is look at the impact that the future will have, not just here in California, but 35 other states that will be moving into non-attainment. So now when we go into the White House, or we go to EPA, or we go to Congress, now we say, "You know what? The majority of the United States has an issue with this, and you need to be able to provide the wherewithal, both in terms of authority and resources, to address these specific sources." So to the extent that we can work with all of you to get support to enhance EPA's authority to deal with those, or perhaps there are those that have said maybe we should have that authority. We're not going that far because I think that would have a reopening of the Clean Air Act. And I think there are things that we don't need to do to get into that big of a fight. But I think that there are things that we can do to address the exact things that you're talking about. And that has to come about through an increased awareness, through a campaign that gets us the resources and gets other agencies the authorities to deal with it. So we're working collectively with EPA and all these other groups to do the very thing that you're asking.
Yeah, but one of the problems that I've seen from a lot of the other groups, they don't look like my community at the table.
Well, there's a lot of groups that we can help educate and we can bring. And to the groups that you're talking about, building support. That's part of what, again, here at the district, we're trying to do is reach out to all of the EJ communities, to disadvantaged communities, to those communities identified under Cal Enviro screens. You know, there's also the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee that EPA is very involved with. So you have like the, as I recall, the Southwest Desert in Arizona. You've got all sorts of groups that are coming together, and I think that there is, in fact, greater recognition of the need to address those communities that are impacted most and have the least ability to do things about it directly. So we're working on that, not only through our AQMP, but also through the way that we hope to mitigate those exact same measures.
Phil, did you have something to
Yeah,
add?
just real quick on the mitigation. The AQMP obviously anticipates a lot of money that was going to be needed for financial incentives to achieve these reductions. And since most of the reductions need to come from the mobile sources, a lot of that money is going to go through mobile sources. But we anticipate in the AQMP that you may be able to find more cost-effective reductions at some point on the stationary source sector. So those small businesses you're talking about that may want to want to move to the cleanest technology available or cleaner technology, but don't have the finances to do so, we hope to divert some of those funds to the stationary source side, especially when we could demonstrate it is cost effective. So that is something that will develop over time, but we'll obviously have to work with you and those groups to help identify the types of projects and programs and outreach that's needed to implement those types. But of the 14 billion we're identifying for needed financing to have this plan be successful, about 1 to 2 billion are anticipated to actually go into small business and residential commercial buildings to help get those emission reductions as well.
So Art, let me just sum up some more directly responsive to your question about the delays. What you've heard, and one other point, but what you heard was that EPA has the authority to regulate new engines. So when they regulate a new engine, they have to give lead time to manufacturers to do that. And then the people have to go out and buy those engines. So that takes time. So that delays everything. And then we're dealing with, our problems here in California, at San Joaquin Valley and South Coast, aren't the same. Well, more people are having problems with attainment because of the new standards, but generally we have, it's just flat out that we have more of a problem than everybody else. So it's hard for EPA to be able to adopt regulations that are really targeted to address our problems when they have to worry about the entire United States. So that also takes the edge off sometimes a little bit of where we would want and need them to go, because they don't write regulations that are just for California. And then what you heard also was when it comes to things like ships, it's not just the United States, but we have to worry about international treaties and issues to be able to get at some of those huge sources that you're pointing out. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I get it, and your points, generally exactly what I've spent my entire career trying to do, which is provide some relief to those most impacted communities and also get at these largest sources of pollution to protect public health. We have lots of other people. Philip, you wanted to add something real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
Just because it's a multi-pronged approach, one important bill that's actually listed in the report is AB 1550 by Gomez that AQMD did support, and that did focus and make sure that 25% of the greenhouse gas reduction funds at $900 million goes to disadvantaged communities, and an additional 10% is going to go to low-income communities as well. So that's a total now of 35% that's going to go to those communities in particular, and in whatever form it goes in. But that's something we supported, and it was signed by the governor.
Yeah, because the legislature looks like me, and that's the only reason it's moving. And you got a caucus in the Southwest that is growing.
You're absolutely right.
And
That's
as
exactly
soon
why
as
it
we
happened.
move off of immigration and voting rights, off this next election, we're moving straight into environmental.
You've got leadership in the legislature that made that bill happen. We fought for years.
And it's from the areas that I work with you.
We fought for years to get the first one through, and it only took us, a year to get this next one through and signed by the governor. So it is good news for those communities, and we're hoping that money gets invested wisely. We're going to work on the implementation. Wayne, you had something else that you had asked to comment on before this. Did you cover it already?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Then I have David, then Bill, and then Larry.
Amy had a comment about exceptional events, and with the newer ozone standard getting lower and lower and lower, I was curious about how exceptional events are being dealt with, because it is a burden of the air districts, and more so, maybe exceptional events not the word, but San Joaquin has a lot of concerns about background levels of ozone and stratospheric intrusion of ozone. But they spent a lot of time and effort looking at that and how that impacts attainment. And I was curious if EPA has chimed in on that, if there's any guidance that may help South Coast San Joaquin attainment.
Right. Well, on exceptional events, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's something that, and for those of you that don't know what that is, it's like if there's a fire, some type of natural event. We deal with exceptional events in Hawaii when the volcano goes off, something that is not controllable by human. And so it's generally weather events or some type of major event, like a fire and what have you. So we, and these guidance that we just recently adopted, I think it was on Monday, so just 2 days ago. It provides the framework for a local air district that can look at when there are exceedances on a particular day, what was happening. And if there was an exceptional event occurring, there is an analysis that is presented to demonstrate that those exceedances were due to that exceptional event. And then we work with the air district or the state, depending on where it is in the country, to basically asterisk those data, and they are not included in the evaluation of non-attainment. So there's a whole process that's in place. We have a lot of people that are working on this. Our region, actually, you can imagine, the majority of these are happening in Region 9, so we actually helped write this guidance, working very closely with the states and with the Western State Air Directors. I don't know if you're familiar with WestStar. It's the group of all the state air directors throughout the West that get together, and their local entities that are involved too. So we have a very good now track record on approving many of these, especially in places like in Arizona, where you get the big haboobs, which are the big dust storms that happen, same in San Joaquin Valley, and we're prepared and we'll work with the South Coast if this is something that's needed. We keep our eyes on it. So that's how exceptional
What
events
happens with something like the Salton Sea that didn't exist, then does exist, and then is not going to exist, and then can create PM problems?
Well, Salton
Is
Sea.
that man-made, is that
Well-
controllable or not controllable?
So Salton Sea is in a category all its own, and at some point, I would greatly, appreciate the opportunity to talk more about the Salton Sea with our colleagues in Imperial County, since 2/3 of the lake is there, and you're bringing up, is it natural or not? It's a source at this point in time. It's one that we know because of the water transfers, of the playas are going to be exposed, there's going to be increased PM10. So the question
Will
is,
that be
what
an
are we?
exceptional event when dust from the Salton Sea blows into?
It'll be dependent on how windy it is. I mean, when you go in, when you look at an exceptional event, you need to look at the wind. I mean, in the case of what you're talking about, wind-blown dust, you look at how windy was it? Is that an exceptional windy day? We have provisions as you're looking at 25 miles per hour or greater. And Imperial County actually has a fair number of exceptional events before us, not related to the Salton Sea yet, but other agricultural sources. So it's a function of what's going on in the meteorology, what the source is, and so forth. And the only other thing I'd mention on Salton Sea is we do have experience in this state with Owens Lake. And that is one district that has really taken an adaptive management approach, looking at the challenges, the huge challenges they've faced. And I think we have a lot to learn there that could really be applied in Salton Sea. Imperial County has actually put in place some proactive rules that as the playas get exposed, they have the authority now to put in PM10 control measures. There'll be things like perhaps looking at wetlands, some kind of constructive wetlands, other kinds of gravel, et cetera. And the South Coast will have some opportunity to do that as well. So Salton Sea's in a category.
I appreciate that. Those are really
Sorry,
good examples.
kind of going off on a tangent.
That's fine. They're really good examples of things you could quantify. Sort of my question was things that are a little bit more nebulous as far as stratospheric. Ozone intrusion is very difficult to quantify.
Yes.
It's modeling related. If you have pollution coming in from China, how would you deal with that? Is there any guidance that South Coast could use?
But I meant to go to your stratospheric ozone component of your question. So stratozone, we do have a white paper that's out looking at stratospheric ozone and the intrusion into the ground level ozone. Again, the Western State Air Directors have, they just met last week in Montana and are looking at this throughout the West. It's, I would call an emerging issue. It's something when you look at both stratospheric, where is it coming from, even perhaps internationally, that's an issue that will be very, very challenging, both technically. Where is it really coming from? Where is that molecule of ozone coming from? What is the source, et cetera, and then is it controllable? So stay tuned. And that's something we welcome the best science to help us figure that one out and what kind of policy options we have. On the international sources, that is one where we do have direct experience in Imperial County in terms of evaluating what is the component of the pollution from Mexico that is causing the exceedances in Imperial County. We're in the process right now of evaluating their PM 2.5 for the 2006 standard. The state submitted a plan that demonstrated that they were attaining but for emissions from Mexico, and it's a specific provision of the Clean Air Act that we actually do have authority for. So there's a provision there. In the case of China and China emissions, that's going to be even the next level of difficulty because you do have to have a good sense of emissions inventory, and it's even difficult enough in Mexicali and looking at Mexico. So, but that's something that we could talk more about at some point in the future. They're emerging issues, they'll be challenging the lower we get in our standards.
That's such a small component. I can't imagine right now that would have a significant impact on our AQMP.
It's getting to the point where we're getting lower and lower and lower, and I saw one paper saying it's about 2 parts per billion can be the influence. So it can be significant depending on how low you need to go.
So we've commented in the ozone implementation rule, which was finalized last year, that we would like to see guidance from EPA on how to deal with background ozone levels and how to deal with that in the model, because we play around with that, and depending on the assumptions you use, you can get very different results. There's nothing you can hone in on. So until EPA gives us guidance, if the guidance comes out and we do a subsequent revision of an AQMP, then maybe we can start taking into account for that. It might obviate the need for some reductions, but as Wayne said, I don't think it's going to be huge, and you still want people to be healthy, you still want people to breathe clean air, and if the standards are set at a certain level, you should still be striving towards getting it down to that level, regardless of where it's coming from.
Bill, your turn.
Oh.
Do you have one as complicated as that?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking when Amy was talking about Kilauea grumbling and making noises. And I used to live in Hawaii, and when Kilauea does that, usually the locals will say Hawaii no kaoi. There's no place like Hawaii. Here in Southern California, when we have an influx, seed stays or something like that, people tend to get irrational, emotional, and certain segments call for more stricter regulation. And to Philip's earlier point about this AQMP, looking for incentive monies or hoping to solve the problem through massive amounts of incentives, and to talk about small businesses, I can tell you firsthand, since my organization represents trade associations and they in turn have the individual businesses, and we represent about 14,000 businesses here just in Southern California. Small businesses are loath to jump to new technology, regardless of what the perceived benefits might be. Simply if somebody's going to wave a voucher or a check at them or something like that. The differences in technology, whether you're talking about body shops, metal finishers, furniture manufacturers, printers, or whatever they are, composites folks, the difference between one company and another company and somebody else might be just a quarter of a tick difference that gives their technology a competitive edge over their competitor. Typically, cleaner technologies have been end of pipe, something that is measured by potential to emit, which we have long had arguments over, versus actual emissions. Companies just don't come into the plant at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, turn on all of their equipment, and run it at full blast 24 hours a day and turn it off. That's not the real world. Whether it's a spray booth or whatever it happens to be. So that creates a burden on small business owners. Additional record keeping, that creates a burden on them, and there's a number of them. So there may be money in our future, but I don't think that it's going to be problematic how many small businesses are going to jump at that, just for that very reason. It's got to do something to affect their bottom line. and to make them competitive. And California, especially Southern California, regrettably has experienced a tremendous loss of a flight of all businesses, but certainly small businesses, because of the heavy regulation that's involved. My other point, or my other question here that I had for you is, you mentioned rulemaking, I guess, for PM 2.5. And I wonder if you could, is that finished, or is that for public consumption? Or when we'll be able to see that?
Yes, what I mentioned is, so you may recall in 2012, we adopted a more stringent PM 2.5 or PM fine standard. And what we just finalized were the it's called the SIP requirements rule, the State Implementation Plan requirements rule. So it's available for the public and for all our districts, and it basically lays out a more detailed roadmap for how to prepare the state implementation plans for areas that are non-attainment.
Is that on your website?
Yes, I'd be happy to get you a citation,
Maybe you
or in the
could give it to
notes
Ann?
we could provide that.
I know Phil.
We can get it for you. We presented it at the AQMP advisory group on our last meeting. Barbara gave a full presentation on the rule that came out.
You now have to rewrite the entire AQMP.
We've been working on that.
Thanks, Amy, your timing's impeccable.
Well, I will say that we've had a lot of good input from all of our states and districts as we put this rule together. It was
I'm
a
sure
long
you've
time
had
coming.
very good input from San Joaquin.
And
Larry.
Thank you, Dr. Liu, and thank you for not expelling me from the meeting from the phones and everything. Amy, thanks for coming. Glad you're here live, and you're due for a softball question, so I'm going to throw it up at you. You mentioned a couple times in your opening remarks about the changing of administration, or coming to a close of administration. And I know the environment doesn't pay any attention to our election cycles, but your agency must pay very close attention to maybe a potential change. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Where's the emphasis right now with the agency? Is it finishing up business that can be finished, or is it making certain we don't start any business that can't be finished? Where's the agency at?
yeah, well, characteristically at this point in an election cycle, the political leadership, this happened about a year ago, identified what were those actions that were in process that needed to be finished by the end of the administration. So that's what is being wound up or finished now, completed. So one example is a heavy-duty greenhouse gas rulemaking for the trucks, taking it from 2018 to 2025. So there are a few of those outstanding actions, but I don't think you'll see many more between now and the inauguration. The other thing that happens during a transition is we start, we have to put together a budget for the next year. That'll be going through, final approval here. And we start preparing the issues, what we know about the issues. So when the transition team comes in, we're ready to brief them, to give them the facts on the ground. If there are certain court cases, that there are deadlines that need to be responded to. So that's the phase that we're also in. But that does not really get going in full swing until the election is over. Then a transition team comes in and so forth. We don't have a transition team in yet. Sometimes they come in before the election.
Sure. So as Amy said, the real focus from the political leadership is winding things down and making sure the things that they wanted to get done were done. As Amy said, the Phase 2 greenhouse gas rule was one of the big areas of focus. People sort of ask us about the timing of our petition, and one of the things that's very critical from my perspective is that there's also a provision for a new administration when they come in. If there's anything that's been started within the last 60 days of the administration coming in, the new administration can in essence put it on hold and do a review. So in my experience, I remember when the arsenic rule was put in place, it was toward the very end as the previous administration was trying to wrap things up. And the Bush administration came in and said, stop, we want to see what's happened. So there's that 60-day window. And so from our perspective, what was important is that we wanted EPA to start on our ultra-low NOx petition. But again, the emphasis is on, hey, we need to wind things down. So that's why we actually went to the White House, because regardless of what the agency is doing, at least in my experience, if the White House says, you guys need to get going on this, the agency is responsive to that. So that's why we went to the White House, we spoke with CEQ, and we said this is a very important issue. They agreed, they said they were gonna do two things. One was make sure that this was also part of the briefing for the new administration as it comes in, and then have discussions with EPA. So we've met with EPA, we spoke with Chris, and we've had all these congressional meetings, and absolutely finalizing the phase 2 greenhouse gas was originally hoped to be done, I would say, July, was actually released in August, which is pretty good. We hope that the administration will still move in a way that is sensitive to our requests. And I think that Matt and a few others from OTAP last week sort of talked about the finalization of the greenhouse gas rule, and they acknowledged the importance of our petition and where it was moving forward. And while they didn't say it directly, they pretty much intimated that hold on to your pants, things are going to move very quickly and you should be okay. So we're optimistic on that particular aspect. And then as far as this administration, I thought that there was actually 2 offices set up by the campaigns in headquarters to provide basically input, for the agency to provide input to the transition teams. But there's no one transition team as of yet. But the campaigns are aware of what the agencies do.
There was a change in legislation that allowed that.
Right.
I just don't think they've been set up yet, but I could be wrong because I'm not in Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's more time than we've ever spent on EPA.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Anyone on the phone or members of the public? Okay, well, Amy, thank you so much, appreciate it. And feel free to run off to your other meeting if you have to. We're gonna circle back now to item number 4, which is the litigation items and related EPA actions on the litigation front from Bill Long. So, Bill?
Thank you, Dr. Liu, and thank you, Amy, for that great discussion. Apart from the litigation status report I provided to everyone, there is one slight update on case number 6. Just to point out that we had indicated the court had reached a decision in the initiatives case. And if you recall, the initiatives case was one where they had adopted an initiative that would basically exempt them from CEQA review. And so the court put the CEQA challenge on hold until a decision was made in that initiatives case. Unfortunately for us, it was an adverse ruling, and so the court did not basically see it our way. But we do plan to appeal that case, and so something might be forthcoming after that. But apart from that update, there is nothing else. And if you have any questions about these cases, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. Any questions on litigation issues? At the table, on the phone, members of the public? Okay, thanks, Bill, for that update. So we got through litigation in record time and got through EPA in record slow time. Now, on to something very substantive, because we had promised more substance in these meetings. And that brings us to this item, which is item number 5, barriers to advancement of clean technologies. And Matt and Bill from CalSTART, who's joined us today, are going to, I guess, do a 2-step on this one. You guys have figured out how to proceed on this?
We're going to wing it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Liu, for inviting us to participate. So I'm Matt Misato. I'm with the Science and Technology Advancement Division here at the South Coast. And previously I worked in the Technology Advancement Office, which is the group that's responsible for the research, development, demonstration, and the deployment of clean technologies. And that office has been doing that type of work for about 27 years now. So I have a lot of empathy for Art and Bill when they're talking about how do you get clean technologies and what are the incentives necessary to get them into the marketplace, because they're typically higher cost. So Bill and I thought we would present, I'm gonna present on the perspective and the lens that we see it through technology advancement. And then Bill is a part of the nonprofit CalSTART, and through their membership, they have clean technology providers as members, as well as fleet users that are members, and so he'll give some examples of how they have addressed some of these barriers to implement cleaner technologies.
What is CalSTART?
If you want, when I start my presentation, why don't I I'll give a quick overview on that.
Dr. Lee asked us to present on the barriers that we see in development and deployment of clean technologies. And not all projects or technologies develop in this linear fashion, but they follow for the most part this kind of different milestones and steps as you approach an idea or a concept, a strategy, then actually implement it into a commercial product that can be purchased and implemented. And so it's not only a road to clean technologies, it's also barriers at every step. So every milestone that you approach, there are barriers which the developer or the end users have to overcome. So first of all, in order to implement a cleaner mousetrap, as it were, it has to exist. And so we have a very aggressive research development and demonstration program to develop and demonstrate these cleaner technologies. But that requires collaboration with innovators, for entities that are interested in the same goals that you have. And it's very difficult because when you start out with a new or innovative strategy, you're not likely dealing with the large-scale manufacturers because there is no impetus for them to develop a cleaner technology or mousetrap. So you're dealing with entrepreneurs, inventors, and even part suppliers that want to sell their new widget. And so having collaboration not only with the developer, but with the state and federal government gives you more veritas in terms of telling these developers, hey, there's a potential for real market value. And I'll get to that in the next step. But once you have the prototype or an idea, a concept, you've actually got to demonstrate in the intended duty cycle, right? So it has to be the appropriate duty cycle for the technology that you're trying to develop. So that is also a barrier because oftentimes a technology, even though it sounds attractive, may not be appropriate for a wide variety of duty cycles. So for example, Art, you talked about all the heavy duty trucks that are going in and out of the port. Today, diesel technology can go 5 miles back and forth to port or can go 150 miles up to San Joaquin. So they use that incumbent technology, the conventional truck, in a wide variety of duty cycles, and it satisfies all of them. But the emissions are very high in certain applications. So we think battery electric trucks, for example, could serve the near dock and near port duty cycles, and then ultra low NOx natural gas or even maybe fuel cells can do the long haul. So it's picking the right technology for the right duty cycle. And all the while, there needs to be what I call a forcing function. In order to convince the manufacturer or the developer to invest the amount of resources and time to then commercialize this product, they need to either have some regulatory backstop on the horizon. So as EPA was talking about their phase 2 regulation of greenhouse gases, as Wayne talked about our low NOx petition, that then engages the major manufacturers to say we need to develop a program where we're going to buy a technology from a small innovator and license it. Or conversely, they need to see that there's a market. So I call that regulatory push or market pull. So there needs to be a market that's established such that the developer is guaranteed or they'll know that they have a product that they can sell and profit from. And as you'll likely hear from Bill, but certainly for me, is we think you need both. You think you need to have some regulatory horizon as well as a market push with incentives. And that should hopefully convince the manufacturer to certify the technology. But even then, it's difficult because as EPA is grappling and as ARB is certainly grappling with, how do you certify or commercialize these, or verify rather, these new innovative strategies, new technologies? Currently, EPA and ARB only certify engines for heavy-duty trucks. So they hadn't heretofore combined an engine with a transmission. So the hybrids that we all know and love today, there was no duty cycle established to verify that it had lower emissions. And so they had to develop this new duty cycle, new test procedure to incorporate not only the engine, but the transmission and the battery. So ARB is addressing that with an innovative regulatory or innovative technology regulation that will incorporate these new duty cycles such that plug-in hybrids, so that's like your Volt, will be able to benefit from this newer and streamlined regulatory process. So they won't be held up because they don't fit in the right category. So that's another barrier. And then to get to the comments that I think both Art and Bill were suggesting is that you still need incentives because the new technologies are typically more expensive than the incumbent technology. So we saw that with hybrids, battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids now. If you look at fuel cell vehicles, those are much more expensive. The Chevy Bolt, 238 miles all electric range, that's going to require, they're incorporating, Chevy's incorporating a $7,500 federal tax incentive. So they're saying it's a $30,000 car, but the sticker price is $37,500. So your net price is $30,000, but you still have to get the federal tax incentive. So you would need these types of incentives to encourage not only the early adopters, but then they call them the fast followers, and then the mass buying public to get into the technology in order to get the deployment. And certainly the deployment that we need, thousands and thousands of heavy-duty vehicles in order to meet the air quality goals. And that's why Phil was talking about the incentive plan that we're developing is going to rely heavily on both of these issues, incentives and the development of that clean technology, which is well on its way in a variety of different architectures. So I found this in Harvard Business Review, so I don't just read People magazine, folks know, but this is a good graphic. It's similar to Maslow's pyramid of needs, where you look at what is the product value. And this really highlights the disparity between where we as an agency, as a government agency, we want to provide clean air. So that's really at the top where social impact is located. But the technology users and the technology providers are really looking at that bottom strata where it's looking at how do I save time, money, improve efficiency, and other things. And so it really highlights, the discrepancy between the goals, but how do we bridge that gap? And how do we ensure that all those things are valued by the consumer, the producer, and the end user, such that we can both achieve the societal benefits. And it's really talking about monetizing the negative externalities that are associated with air pollution. But the good news is there's technologies that are now available. 8 years ago, there were no electric cars. Right? There were no plug-in hybrids. Nissan and Chevy were the first to come out with the battery electric vehicle and the plug-in hybrid with a Volt. Now this is an old site, this is last year, there's lots of different models that are available. If you go to our parking lot here, if you drive a plug-in vehicle, you're not going to find a spot to plug in because they're all being utilized. But if you do have an EV, we're getting more chargers, so hopefully that'll be remedied here in the near term. This is also happening on the medium and heavy duty front, so on transit and medium package delivery and other technologies. We just received a grant from ARB to develop Class 8 drayage trucks with major manufacturers. So that's a big step that we're hopeful we'll get some products out shortly.
What about commercial trucks? The guys that do lots of construction and all that.
Yeah, so those can be anywhere from Class 2 or up, but those are, so what we're doing, Art, as you mentioned, is we have to look at the NOx inventory. So where's the most bang for a buck? So Class 8 heavy-duty trucks is the top one, then there's off-road, and then a couple more down are all the light-duty vehicles. That includes medium SUVs and big work trucks. So we actually have a project with, or had a project with EPRI to develop bucket trucks and other work trucks that are electrified. I'm happy to talk to you more about that.
That's kind of interesting that you mentioned that you can't find a vacant charging station over here. It's kind of like us being neighbors, and you've got the lawnmower, and I come over every week and borrow it. I don't have to buy a lawnmower if you're willing to lend it to me. And with electricity rates going up, largely because of this emphasis on clean technologies and emission reductions and everything, people are finding themselves, paying more and more. I retired from Edison, so I can tell you that when I was there, we looked kind of askance. you know, at solar and wind and everything, anything that wasn't on the grid, that we were going to get revenue from. We looked a little askance at it, yeah, you do that anyway, but I see more of a future for your hybrids, where the engine itself can recharge, rather than plug it in, you know, or of course storage too. But I think that over time, we're going to see a point where there may not be any off-peak hours, especially with this big surge in electronics innovation and everything. We're all charging everything nowadays, you know, at all hours of the day. So there just may, we're not going to, bottom line is, we're not going to be seeing cheaper electricity anytime soon.
Well, yeah, and I'd love to talk to you more at length about that, because there is, you know, a couple of things. One is with the renewable RPS, renewable portfolio standard, as well as the new legislation that went through, where we'll have to achieve more renewables on the grid. We're seeing the effects of the duck curve, the infamous duck curve, where all the electricity is coming in the middle of the day, as opposed to you know, the traditional peak sources. And so there are some thoughts that they do storage, so take that offload, and then that way you can levelize the grid load over the course of the day. But you know, there's these state mandates now for more transportation electrification. So you know, we're working with Edison on how they electrify Port of Long Beach, and how do we do more transportation electrification.
But see, that's arts people up there in Sacramento that are doing that. So.
Well, so yeah, we think there's, but I think your point, Bill, is that we're looking at not just electrification, we're looking at different technologies as well. So fuel cells, ultra low NOx, natural gas engines.
And regrettably, you know, I don't know that we'll ever have another serious conversation about nuclear anymore. But I mean, you know.
Well, funny you mentioned that. So I used to work at Edison in the nuclear department. So I worked on the decommissioning of Psalms 1. So for what it's worth, you know, I lament the closing of those electrical plants as well. But you know, the spent fuel is a big issue.
Yeah.
In any case, back to the subject. A good example of regulations working in tandem with incentives are fleet rules. Right, so there's related to public fleets, but because we have the fleet rules in effect, as well as the Carl Moyer program and other incentive programs, we were able to do huge amounts of fleet turnover. One of the big success stories.
What about the state? Because the biggest users, the biggest fleets are county, the state, and municipalities and city fleets. Why don't we start with? Why don't we start with them?
I know Dr. Liu is very interested in how do we utilize the full extent.
Post offices, I believe, is going to have a vehicle now, aren't they?
They're in discussions.
They're in discussions as a.
Yeah, they haven't moved on it yet.
So we have some authority under our fleet rules to address that issue. Art and staff is finding a way to incorporate that into the air quality management plan a little more clearly than was in the draft as a result of my comments, I hope.
Because
so
I mean,
we're working on it.
Well, you're asking everybody else at the table to do it, but on the other side of the table, you're not willing to do it yourselves.
As I said, we have some authority under the fleet rules, and I'm asking staff to use our full authority to address the problem.
So that's just an example where there's a potential for both, as I mentioned, regulatory push and market pull.
But you understand from my side of the table, and Bill's, is why are you asking me to paint my house when you haven't painted yours? And cleaned your lawn, you know?
I think Dr.
Well, you can't
Liu
say that to
saying-
AQMD, but you can say that to other agencies, you're right.
Yeah. Dr. Liu is saying that we're painting our house below VOC paint. We're gonna try.
Well, and I mean, you can remember what the diesel buses were like with, RTA and MTA before they went to 100% CNG.
Well, you know, I want to thank we got one in my district, because I sit on a school board. But, you know, there's not a lot of people like me who sit on school boards that are willing to push for the paperwork and direct staff to do it. They're too lazy.
And schools are particularly tricky because schools aren't obligated to actually provide transportation services, and their dollars are scarce and limited. So schools are certainly, school bus fleets are certainly one of the trickier ones.
Dr. Lewis, with one comment, as a former elected city official, we took it upon ourselves to make certain we passed legislation that the city would no longer purchase any vehicles that didn't meet a standard. And then therefore, we kind of self-regulated ourselves. We didn't need anybody from the outside, and we went to the people and said, this is a good thing, it's gonna cost, but it's a good thing in the long term. So there's more going on behind the scenes.
And we should publicize that, right, and I didn't know that.
That should be important. Yeah, certainly, yeah. We just sat down and we just drafted some legislation, said this is what we're gonna do. So Public Works now, when they brought proposals to us, this was the standard, and, you know, but that I think that should be publicized, is that government not always sitting on their hands. Every once in a while, there's some positive things going on. And you're right, it doesn't get enough publicity. That's its problem.
And I just wanted to highlight we encourage the ARB to establish these optional low NOx centers. So the existing center for heavy duty engines is 0.2 grams per brake horsepower hour NOx. The ARB adopted these optional low NOx standards of 0.1, 0.05, and 0.02. And then we were successful in working with the Energy Commission to actually commercialize an 8.9 liter engine at the 90% lower NOx standard. Amy relayed our petition regarding making the 0.02 gram level actually a standard for heavy-duty trucks. And that way, if you looked at the inventories, you know that much of the NOx inventory is due to out-of-state trucks, not just in-state trucks. And so this will help us, again, achieve the goals of reducing emissions.
Have you guys ever had a fair or anything with all these vehicles for state, federal, and people? Because I know I'm looking at another vehicle, but I gotta pay another 5 or 10 grand for a Pyrus or a Volt or any of these other things. But I'm looking at the cost. Have you guys ever thought about doing that?
Yeah, you just actually missed National EV Week last week. So there was a clean car show in Santa Monica. Yeah, and there were other events that were just held, and it's annual.
Yeah, we had demonstration vehicles Saturday, right?
Right. So there are periodically throughout the year, but there's some big ones like Alt Car Expo in Santa Monica. There's an ACT Expo.
Well, who puts the word out on that?
There are different organizations. We typically sponsor it, but we can make a point of ensuring that the HRAG is notified of when these activities are occurring.
They should send that out too. There's 1,200 school boards. I don't know how many cities there are. 480. Yeah. That's already, you've already missed probably at 1,600. That is, you have huge purchasing power. You've got all the so one of the things I would suggest is that you have your PR people and stuff send those things out, and also go to the Latino and minority media. Because if you're only getting the Santa Monicas and the South counties and
we don't control where they host the All Car Expo, but yeah, they've picked Santa Monica for the last several years.
But you understand, you're only getting one end of the market.
Yeah, and so there's actually another program called Replace Your Ride, which is focused on low-income EJ communities, where if you turn in your vehicle, you get a voucher, and you can get up to $9,500 to buy a cleaner, late model year vehicle. So say you get a Nissan Leaf off lease, and they're actually pretty inexpensive now, so you can almost pay for the full amount of that vehicle with your scrap car and the voucher. So that's
you get a car for.
We had one of those about 2 months ago in Inglewood. People got the full amount of money to purchase a used or new EV car.
Electric car, yeah.
A lot of people showed up.
That was one at the CarMax, right?
CarMax, with Assembly Member Autumn Burke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why can't those communities be able to purchase one, new one? Why do we have to take second hand?
Well, you had the option.
You can buy a new car if you can afford it.
Yeah, the option.
You get up to $9,500 if you're the lowest income. You get up to and you're buying an alternative fuel car. You get up to $9,500 that can be applied to a new car, but most of those people, because they have such low income, can't afford it.
Well,
so they're looking for, hold on, Art. They're looking for good deals, and what's happened as a lot of these electric vehicles and like the Volt, plug-in electric vehicles, have come off of lease after 3 years, and they're available at a really good price. So I know that people are getting, they go to the dealer and say, okay, I've got $9,500 in incentives, what do you have? And they said, well, this Leaf we just got this Leaf in, it's 2 or 3 years old.
and it's $10,000. And they're like, okay, I'll write you a check for $500, thank you very much. And, you know, they also get incentives to do charging infrastructure from us, and they can qualify up to $500, I think.
Yeah, but the replace your ride, they get almost $2,000 for installation, so it's a better.
Oh,
deal.
2,000,
That is-
2,000, that pays for the whole thing. Yeah, so you can even get free faster charging.
But one
than
of the
just
problems
plugging
we
into the
run,
regular.
because I remember I told you this, is that, you know, we go from paycheck to paycheck or from one contract, is the sales tax that the
They
state
do have to pay sales
takes out
tax.
of us.
No, they
So if there's a way to be able to cut that,
haven't been able to do that yet. State's
Well,
a
I
little
mean-
particular about collecting sales tax.
no, but I mean, there's
There
an
was
incentive
some
program.
legislation
Yeah, there was.
to
There was an
that
attempt,
point,
yeah.
and part of it was, don't charge sales tax on the incremental cost. You know,
Right,
charge it on the
exactly.
base vehicle,
Yeah, that was
but
the-
not on that extra
And
cost.
who was that bill from?
You know, I can't remember who carried that
That
first,
was last year.
That was last year.
and
Who
we really
carried
tried
it?
to
I
push
can't
that
remember.
through. That
The
was-
county TC was involved.
Yeah.
I don't
That's
remember
a,
who
we know
carried
that's a.
Because we're not getting involved in legislation.
We know that's a historic problem.
Absolutely right.
There's a local preference provision that can be written in. If you have local providers, you can give them an incentive and reduce the tax liability for activity in the community. We did that very same thing. So that generated the interest in our local businesses that they would want to participate in the bidding process with the big players.
But isn't it true, Larry, that most of the city and counties, they don't like that, because that's money out of their coffers?
Right.
Because I know we were looking at that for hydrogen, and
But
on
in the
that
long,
one, we got a lot of
but in the long run,
opposition.
the community goodwill that you get by providing the opportunity to generate local business.
Right.
Economically, you know, let's, you know, we can do a study on that. But I think when people, because in council meetings, they would step up all the time and say, why don't you buy local, why don't you buy local? So we decided that we would put this provision in, and therefore purchases were made through our local dealership. And, you know, and in the end of the day, that dealership responded to anything and everything the city needed and wanted. So I think it was a good community thing to do. Some of those incentives do have their issues and problems, but back to the addressing municipalities, we didn't allow anybody come into our community to sell us something as a council without a full-blown presentation. So we put the onus back on the provider or the vendor. So you want to sell this technology, then, you know, it's on our agenda, get here and tell us why we should buy it from you. And I would put a lot of this emphasis back on those providers. I mean, those vendors who actually have the technology, and let them battle it out. Who's got the best game? I mean, so there's a way to get around it if you're, and the people I work with are so reasonable that they want to hear those stories. I don't think there's too many communities in the Inland Empire would shut that down. They want to hear those stories.
I mean, we're here talking about barriers, but it's also about how to overcome those barriers. And one of the things that we noticed is just by partnering with SoCalGas and with the Energy Commission and kicking in a little bit of our money and helping to incentivize the development of these ultra-low NOx natural gas engines, the diesel control technology manufacturers then came back and said, well, wait a minute, we can get in this game too, and we can meet that standard. And so now they're quickly trying to catch up and produce an engine that's equally as clean, which is exactly what you want, because then they're battling it out. I mean, you know, they're coming in and everyone's trying to get a piece of that market. So, you know, that's one way to overcome those barriers.
And that's what we did when the 0.2 gram standard was established in 2010. So we did the same thing. We developed the natural gas engine first, met the standard 3 years in advance in 2007, and then the diesel engine manufacturers had to catch up, because they saw that there was a technology that met the standard.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Well, this is a great topic area, and obviously we could go on for a long time on this. What I'm going to try and do is tag team off the back end of what Matt set up and talk some more about some of the barriers, but then look at some of these pathways of what can we do to move things forward, to actually get these clean vehicles out on the road, and frankly, California companies developing many of the technologies that go into these vehicles. So for us, and just as background on CalSTART, for those who don't know us, we've been around for 25 years. We're a Clean Transportation Technologies organization. We have about 165 member companies, half in California still, but the rest of them in the rest of the country and some overseas. And our goal is kind of the two things. We want to build an industry that makes the technologies that lead to these solutions. So we want jobs and clean air linked together. That's always been our focus. And a picture of the roof is interesting here. That happens to be our headquarters offices. We have offices in New York, the Midwest, Colorado, and 3 in California. Those are solar panels on the roof. Now, how the heck did a nonprofit get the chance to do that? Well, it penciled out. And this is an example of where technology is starting to go. We couldn't have afforded that 10 years ago, but we could 5 years ago. And what we're seeing is this tremendous breakthrough in the drop in price and the increase in capabilities of some of these advanced technologies as we create markets for them, as we try to move them into early applications where they make sense. Eventually now we're seeing that this makes sense on rooftops of homes. It now pencils out on rooftops of buildings. So I think we're seeing a similar thing in transportation. Let me just kind of walk through that a little bit. Let's start with maybe what's not working. So there, as Matt said, there definitely are barriers to clean tech. I clumped them in 4 categories. On the technology side, I think we're seeing the technologies now, and I've been in this business more than 25 years at CalSTART, but what we have seen is the technology is now ready to move into the first applications. It's taken a while to get there. But what we still have is higher incremental costs, so these things do cost more than the conventional dirtier tech that they're replacing. They're still in lower volume production, and sometimes, and quite often, they're in small manufacturers' hands, but that's starting to change. Field support and maintenance has still been limited. That's a challenge for fleets. You got to make sure that your vehicle can be used. You don't want to lose uptime. And there's a limited supply chain for the components for these more advanced technologies. And that even includes the natural gas low NOx engines that are coming forward. They're still at low volumes, but they're more mature than some of the other technologies. On the economic side, we have really cheap prices for fuel, high carbon fuel prices. That's really been tough in all the marketplaces. Now, that can be viewed as a real success because we've got cheaper fuel prices, but that makes it tough for cleaner technologies to move into that market. Most business models do depend on fuel savings, so natural gas has been a real success story at having a lower price, but now with diesel and gasoline so cheap, that difference between the 2 fuel prices is not as big as it used to be. Similar with electricity. As high as electricity may be, when it's run in a vehicle, it's actually really a pretty cheap fuel because of the efficiency aboard the vehicle. But you need to use a lot, you need to put it in vehicles that are used all the time, and it's tough when diesel is as cheap as it is at the moment. On the policy side, so I'm in charge of our medium and heavy duty. I deal with trucks and buses. We have other folks in our group that deal with cars and fuels. On the policy side, there's really no added benefits for a user to have these technologies at the moment. And what we really need to do is be thinking about smart policies that reward early users. So we need to have incentives to help reduce the price differential, but some other things that can help reduce the risk of use. Preferential treatment. The ports have really been looking at, if maybe you had a very clean truck, could you get around Pier Pass? Could you get more turns per day as a business? Reduced registration fees, taking some of the cost off of sales tax on the incremental cost. What could we do there? On the regulatory side, similarly, there isn't any requirement that the manufacturers make these technologies at the moment. And South Coast, I think, is facing, particularly California, and South Coast is the point of the spear for California. We just had SB 32 passed. That calls for a 40% reduction in carbon over the next 10 years. 2020 to 2030. Combined with that, we have to reduce 65, what's the current AQMP? 65% of our NOx?
45.
No, we're down to 55.
55, okay. Still, at the same time, to do both of those at the same time, it starts to narrow the kinds of technologies that can do both. So you really have to start looking at some smart commercialization plans to target those things, those pathways that can get you there. So one of the reasons why I think South Coast and ARB takes a lot of shots for looking at zero emission technology, it's because that technology can actually do both. It can help you on climate change and it can help you on local impacts and criteria emissions. Similarly though, you do have ultra low NOx natural gas, and if you had renewable natural gas in it, that's a heck of a good pathway too for carbon and for criteria emissions. If we can get ultra low NOx diesel with renewable diesel, again, that's another thing to have in your hip pocket, but we need to probably be working on those kinds of pathways. This looks a little busy. I put this up because one of the things we've tried to do, I guess we've learned some things, some of it's hit and miss, and some of it you really try to be more thoughtful and lay out plans. we've really looked at what's the, if you will, the pipeline to the market. What are the commercialization stages? Pretty similar to Matt's curved road that he had. We've tried to add something else to it called TRLs, or Technology Readiness Levels. This is something that was developed by NASA as they were trying to really track how do you move technologies forward on a fast track and know where you are in the process. The manufacturers do use this, the TRL level, so you'll see the large truck makers and car makers using TRL. They also have something called MRL, Manufacturing Readiness Levels. So we've tried to match this up with things that are in demo stages, things that are in advanced pilot stages, and then things that are moving into the early market with the TRL, so we kind of know where we are. The state of California is blessed with some pretty good tools to get the job done. And I think one of the things that we really need to be fighting for is to better align these tools, these funding sources and these policies that can actually help us feed this pipeline better, have better handoff across agencies. I will show this example. Matt mentioned it earlier, this zero emission drayage project that was just launched. This is really a poster child project to show how you take technologies that were funded originally from Air District and then from the CEC, a little bit of money from DOE, and now with ARB and the Air District money, really moving it through this pipeline. And we'll take a look at that as an example. All right, so this is real busy. But one of the things we've done internally, and we're working with a lot of agencies on this, is trying to understand what is the state of play in technology? Where are they on this continuum to the marketplace? So you want to be to the right to be in the early market. So we know the low NOx 8.9 liter, that's in the early marketplace now. That would be a TRL 9 technology. Interestingly, zero emission battery buses have now just moved into the TRL 9 range. They are ready for early penetration. They actually are a product. Zero emission medium duty delivery and shuttle buses. Those are right there moving into the early marketplace. Now, I also highlighted this near and zero emission drayage. That's still at the demo stage. It's not something that you're going to say, oh yeah, you can buy one of those off the lot tomorrow. That's not where it is. But with smart planning, we now have a good demo project going with 4 OEMs that will move that into the pilot stage and then move that towards commercialization.
Where's hydrogen at?
Hydrogen's probably, in the bus realm, hydrogen would be at TRL 7 or 8. Still pretty expensive, but the technology is ready to move into pilots for sure. And it's right on the cusp of the market depending on the application. But in trucks, it would be more like TRL 5 or 6.
Bill, do you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait till the end?
I just had a quick one about
Your choice. What do you think?
clarification.
Clarification, I think questions would be good.
Yeah, the zero emissions are we talking battery or fuel cells, or what type of technology?
Yes.
Both, or all?
I think we're getting into an interesting space, and some people are even using near and zero emission, near zero emission and zero emission. But zero emission generally is going to be, practically speaking today, is either going to be battery electric, fuel cell electric, or overhead catenary connected electric.
Well,
those are the zero emission technologies.
Truly zero emission is if you're running on sunshine, right? But only partially on sunshine depending upon the grid mix.
But to an earlier question, it's interesting, this duck curve that Matt was mentioning, we're seeing all this much greater generation of surplus electricity during the daytime because of all the solar, grid level solar plants. We actually might be able to charge vehicles during the day, which we never thought we should. I mean, the utilities always had the best guidance, hey, charge at night because you don't want to charge during peak. Well, peak is moving now, and peak production is, actually we've got a surplus and we're moving towards a bigger surplus. So
depending on the time of year.
We're in an interesting space. I just think that what everybody should think about is it's pretty dynamic right now. It's very much changing. The technology is improving. And as we've looked at this, the simple things we try to focus on is, okay, if you're trying to move new technology forward, how do you try to take these things through this process? And first we focus on growing beachhead markets. Where can a new technology have success first? And then what are the stepping stones that can be built out from that to address larger and larger market shares? Building ecosystems for success. So if you're going to launch something in a beachhead, make sure you're starting to build the support network for that, whether that be infrastructure, whether it's maintenance and parts support depots, whether it's benefits for the users in that area. And then the last thing is we need to continue on a parallel path just accelerating fuels. So we need, as the grid is decarbonizing at an incredibly fast rate, similarly, we need to get an accelerated pace of decarbonized fuels, liquid fuels, and gaseous fuels out. So I share this because in the electric bus space, we actually are seeing a pretty dynamic market. There's now, as you can see, 9 bus manufacturers, almost 20 products that are out there. These are early stage products that you actually can order and buy as a transit user or as just a parking lot shuttle operator or the like. I operate an incentive program for ARB that actually has money where you can get this for low NOx natural gas, electric, and for hybrid, and get money on the hood, if you will, so it buys down the cost for a fleet. So what can we do with the knowledge? And one of the things we've been trying to do is lay out just you got to know where you're going, where you're starting to figure out, okay, how do we get there? And the toughest business case everybody's talked about is zero emission. How the heck do you get to zero emission heavy duty? So knowing where you want to be, eventually, I think the goal in this region and in others in the state is at least near and zero emission regional heavy duty. So not just drayage trucks, but a lot of the vehicles that work around the region, not line haul, long haul, but within heavy vehicles in a region. And we know where our beachhead is right now. It's a zero emission bus. What's the pathway to get from there to be able to finally address something that's slightly different and certainly a different application? One of the things that as we've looked at this is if we can start to grow success in zero emission bus, these next stages start to open up for you. Zero emission shuttle, zero emission delivery, zero emission yard hostlers. These are things that are all early products right now. They all have very similar drivetrains and component sizing to transit buses. So you're actually leveraging something that's already in there. You're building a supply chain. So you can also start to build out infrastructure that this network of vehicles can now use within a region. If you can add on top of that, in fact, I think you probably have to, not just deployment of infrastructure and planning for it, but maybe user requirements and user benefits. So the loose signal there is potentially fleet rules and things like that. And then continue to invest in demonstrations on more advanced technologies. Then you get towards zero emission drayage. So we have a really good demonstration going that will lead to a pilot. And then eventually you can get into medium and heavy duty delivery and then regional heavy duty. And I can see the fits in the powertrains, the power electronics, and all the supporting components to be able to get there in the 2025, 2030 timeframe if you line up all of these elements.
I think there's also opportunities there, if you go back to that, that's all right. There's also opportunities, not only the hostlers, but other off-road equipment.
Agreed. Yeah. Very much agreed on that. And I think, Joe, to your point, they would also leverage these same component sets. And that's what we really need to do is look where we can actually have stepping stones and extend off of new addressable markets and build out. I think what we've done sometimes in the past, and CalStar's been guilty of it, you do a demo for the ultimate end solution, but you haven't built a path to get there. We're really trying to figure out, let's be smart about building a path to get to where we want to go. So this is one example of what we could do, near zero emission drayage, near and zero emission. It's currently in demo stage. From everything I know, and I've worked with Matt and his team very closely on this, we think we can get into the pilot stage, which means now having a product that has been engineering validated through an OEM, original equipment manufacturer, truck maker, and be ready to move out into the 20s and 50s to be tested with fleet partners, and then moving into early production somewhere in the early years of the 2020s. These are some of the things, and we don't need to read it all, but I think we need to do pilot funds, and I've talked to ARB about this, second wave of demos.
It takes 4 years to move it from a pilot.
Yeah, it takes a while to move it through the One of the things we've learned, Art, is to really get a bulletproof product, because that's what the fleets want. They don't want something with wires hanging out of the bottom. You really got to go through these validation stages. We're trying to speed them up with the truck makers, but you got to make sure that they validate the technology, the engineering is good, and they build a supply chain to build these things at volume.
So you get okay, it's validated, it's gone through the whole gauntlet of of tests, 4 years or 5 years. Now, are the manufacturing, how long does it take to set up all the presses and the manufacturing, the assembly line? I imagine that takes another year or 2 years of planning.
Well, what they would be doing as they move into the, even before the pilot stage, we're working with these guys to lay out the commercialization roadmap for these technologies. You'd want to lay that out by 2018, around that time frame, so that you are ready to gear up to manufacturing in the 2021, 2022.
Yeah, hopefully they do that in parallel.
Yeah.
Being from
But I would
education-
say, just one note, they need to know that there's gonna be a requirement for or a demand for those. I mean, as I talk to the truck makers, they also wanna know, all right, we can do it, we know the technology's there, is there gonna be a market? We have to work in parallel in all of these to create this market draw or requirement, or both.
Because what we're finding is, as you go from the pilot stage to the early commercial or design for manufacturing, it's actually a handoff internally on the big truck manufacturing team. So it goes from their advanced technology group to their commercial group. So it goes from the research geeks.
The
like
dreamers
me,
to the doers.
Right, to the actually, okay, how is this gonna go down the production line? Can I hang this bolt or this widget here? No, it's gonna get in this way, so we have to move this around. So they're actually planning the handoff at that point. And so by the time the pilot is underway and concluding, there needs to be a signal that it can go. They need the ammunition internally to say, hey, VP of sales, we need to get this over in the manufacturing side now. Give us the resources to do that.
Because they're the ones that ultimately it's gonna pan out at the bottom line. But on the education side, are we ready for the human resource element to support that?
We aren't ready yet, and I think one of the things that we've been talking to the Energy Commission and others about, we need to start investing now in training technicians.
That's what I'm
to work
working
on this
at.
technology.
In
Absolutely.
the school end,
We need to be working on setting up service and support centers, either through the OEs or on behalf of multiple small companies, because there are some good small companies moving into the space. That needs to start now, absolutely right. Now, what we don't want to do is train a bunch of people and then we don't have the product out there, so they're going, man, I got the training, but where's my job? But I think this is something we need to be doing over the next 3-4 years.
We have an established curricula through the community colleges for natural gas engines, for example.
Right.
And then we would hope to fold in kind of the electric drivetrain component.
Because I'm a candidate for.
And that was a really good program.
I'm running for an open seat right now for that, and that's one of the things that we're looking at.
Okay.
One
So
of the
we wanna update it.
biggest missing
Technology
components to this, I think, is that, California has become a regulation-driven state.
You think so?
I know so. And I think it's laudable that you have agencies like the district and others, that are looking at technology innovation. But that's not where it's got to start. Where it's got to start is really at the top down, at our legislators and at our governors. I'm old enough to remember when California was rich with aviation and aerospace, car manufacturers. Hell, we had a Corvette plant out here in Van Nuys. Chevrolet was out here. They're all gone. One of the biggest attractions there is that people were able to participate, and they were able to participate not only in jobs, but in building homes, sending their kids to college, and for automobile manufacturers, buy cars, and what have you. Right now, everything is driven by this regulation, that regulation, climate change, something else. You all have a reclaim program, which you call market-based, and it's based on what? Shutdown emission credits. Where do you get shutdown credits? Companies going out of business or closing, jobs lost.
I have to correct you, Bill, that's not how it's based on.
Well,
It's based on best available retrofit technologies.
But
It was supposed to be based on.
But that's where the credits come from, or they're come from
That's where the
shutdowns.
credits have mainly come from over the course of the last several years, but that's not how it's supposed to work.
Well, it's not, granted, it may not supposed to be working that way, but that's where we're at.
I also correct you that we do have auto manufacturers. We now have Tesla in California. Now we've got a Tesla competitor in Gardena, right?
We could have had a Tesla mega battery plant that went to Nevada. You know, and there you would have an opportunity to put Californians to work and incentivize them to buy electric vehicles, whether they're Teslas or anything else.
Well, Bill, let me just observe here, and I'll finish up too here, but I'm sensitive to this because that's how we were founded. CalSTART got formed during the brain drain of the defense and aerospace industry downturn. And our goal was, how do we reemploy really bright, high technology engineers and other folks back into some other sectors? And advanced transportation was one of those where we saw a nexus of technology and skill capability. It happened slower than I wanted it to. But I would also observe that I think regulations, which we decry sometimes, are the tools that we use to guide the marketplace. And then you let the marketplace be really creative. And I think we do need to have the signals of where do we need to go as society? Do we solve climate change or not? Do we do something about clean air in people's communities or not? If we do, then set those signals and let industry then figure out how to get towards those tough goals. And I will tell you, I'm going to attend a briefing at a major truck maker end of next month. They're bringing in California-based driveline suppliers who they want to meet with because they realize that they need to be moving towards zero-emission technologies, and they're looking for partners. Because of California's regulations, flawed or otherwise, we have BYD that opened a plant in the high desert. We've got CCW out in Riverside.
That plant.
Just expanded it. CCW, which now is making zero-emission buses out in Riverside.
Proterra.
We've got Proterra just opened a new facility here. So it isn't just a couple of, like Tesla, which is often viewed as the rich person's car. Tesla's model was started at its beachhead and moved down market. I'm focused on the heavy-duty stuff. We're actually seeing the benefits of California's regs driving new, more innovative business now. So I do get the trade-offs, but I actually can see it working. I just did a supplier study nationwide on high-efficiency, heavy-duty suppliers. We've got more than our share in California right now, and it's partly driven by what we have done. People realize, hey, this is the first market. I want to be here. I'll employ innovative folks here.
And you left out TransPower.
Didn't mean to. And there's also Motive, there's
US
EDI,
Hybrid.
US Hybrid. I mean, you go up and down the coast, and we're pretty rich with some innovation. We're not going to win everything,
No.
but we've set up interesting. So let me just finish up if I could. This is the project, and I think you've all heard about it. This is South Coast actually pulled together, and this is rarely done, almost all the other air districts in the state. And then we got 4 OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, to actually come into this team and get all the ARB money in this segment to actually develop 4 unique demonstration paths that will move towards pilots for zero-emission drayage trucks. And some are battery electric, some are natural gas range extended electric, which I think is actually very promising. One is a diesel plug-in hybrid that Volvo is actually showing it to ARB today up north. That came actually originally out of South Coast funding. Matt and his team put money into that. Then it moved into CEC and Department of Energy money, and now it's going the next step. So this is like again, as I said, this is a poster child for one of the ways that you can really make a difference to move these technologies on a pathway forward. We won't go through all of this, but we do need to look at other pieces of the total cost of ownership. We really need to make it easier for fleets to be able to reduce their risks to buy these technologies and use them. And I think create secondary markets so we make sure that we can get, a Class 8 truck's only used for 4 years by the first owner.
Notice how he sneaks in no sales tax and incremental costs, anticipating the conversation we're going to have before he does presentation.
Just thinking ahead, Dr. Lou.
But you edited
I didn't have and a final thought, we actually had an industry innovators roundtable here at the district. Dr. Lou, Dr. Miyasato were there, among others from the district and other agencies, truck makers, innovators, fleets. And it was interesting what the innovators said, and these are more medium-duty sized innovators than the really large folks. They said, actually, they need a strong signal of where we need to go. Don't just regulate the status quo tech or the incumbent tech. Make sure you've got flexibility to let new technology come in. And then phased commercialization. Really think about, on this fast timeline we've got, how do we continue to keep the pipeline full of innovation?
There was another thing that came out of that too, which was really interesting, was where to put the incentive dollars, you know, and on the retail side, there was less demand for the incentive dollars there than it was on the upfront sort of manufacturing and kicking off initiation and pilot side of things. They saw more of a need for the incentive dollars there, which I thought was really kind of interesting.
I think what they wanted is a partnership. It's like, I think what I've heard from manufacturers and suppliers, Joe, is that, you know, if we want to get there, let's get there together. So help us get this through demo. We don't have that much R&D money. So what can you do to help us? And we'll put our skin in the game, but what will you do to help us go this direction? Because nationally, we're kind of going a different direction.
What they were kind of saying too was give us those strong regulations, that certainty on the retail side, sort of where the end goal is going to be, and require that. So we're not relying on what could be, you know, hit and miss incentive funding on that part of it.
Yeah, don't make it only incentive funding. I think
Yeah.
that was one of the big
that was one of
takeaways.
the messages.
So the other complementary policies, and I kind of think we just need to be thinking about these things in parallel. There's not one solution to this. It's not like, well, let's have user incentives, a done deal, or let's just have regulations and walk away. We really need to be thinking about a model for change that has kind of multiple moving parts, coordinated across the agencies, and I think we actually can make progress. So maybe too long, but this is a really meaty topic. I'm really pleased that you invited us to take part, so thank you.
What progress is being made in charging stations? I remember when John Bryson, we were having this discussion on EV1s and everything.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
There has to be a parallel path there between electric vehicles and charging stations. You have to pretty much have the same as you have gas stations today to give people confidence and making long trips. So is there a plan to develop massive amounts of charging stations up and down California and elsewhere in the United States? If I want to go to Yellowstone or if I just want to go to Sequoia?
So Matt can probably talk about that and the light duty a little bit more. Yeah, there are plans. There's obviously where people have focused first is where do most people in these early vehicles charge the most? And let's talk cars first. That would be home, business, and then some destination sites. So they've really been focused on workplace charging, you know, home charging and the like. And now we're starting to see people get into, it's called level 2 fast charge or level 3 fast charge, DC fast charge. The standard's emerging on that, but that would be where you'd be able to drive up the highway and plug in for 20 minutes or 15 minutes and recharge your car. I'm myself more interested on the emerging standards for medium and heavy duty. We're starting to see really large bus depots go in. So all of a sudden somebody, instead of having 1 or 2 electric buses, is going to have a depot with 20 to 40 electric buses. That's actually a pretty heavy load. That's a different charge level rate than light duties, and the standards are evolving there. So we're working right now with EPRI and others to try and get that right. I think in this basin, we need to lay out an infrastructure plan. This is one of the things we've been really calling for a while as we studied the drayage trucks. We need to think about what's the charging for these guys at their domiciles, because most of them refuel at their domicile. They don't go out and find a diesel station somewhere. They refuel, or wet hose they call it. How do we charge there? How do we have opportunity charging? Maybe in some routes we have overhead catenary charging. You know, what are the options? We really need to get a handle on this so that over the next 5 years we can start laying out a plan and then start installing. So that it's evolving yet on the heavy side.
So for light duty, it's set. There's a SAE standard, J1772. All the vehicles are come with that same standard. There's 2 DC fast charging standards. There's the Japanese standard called CHAdeMO. There's also a US and German standard that was adopted by the automakers. So there's still kind of a...
And Tesla.
Well, Tesla's separate, yeah. So there's a little bit of a tension there between the Japanese automakers and the American and German automakers. But the DC fast charging now that's being funded through us and the Energy Commission, it's a dual hose DC fast charger, it has both. And there are plans to go up and down, you know, the region and the state. The final word on that, though, as you get longer and longer or bigger and bigger battery electric vehicles, the thought is you really rely on your home charging. So if you can charge at night with a level 2 think 4 hours and get 238 miles. That's probably good for the day. Just come back and recharge again. So then the focus really will be on destination charging and home charging. So, but as Bill said, really looking at residential is the first one. That's where you really want to incentivize that. Then there's workplace, so long dwell time charging, and then destination.
And there has been an issue on sort of kickstarting the infrastructure, and what happened was the PUC was encouraging private industry to do it. It wasn't happening fast enough, and so the independent, the investor-owned utilities have then submitted proposals to take part of that in different ways, shapes, and forms for all three of them, but to try to jumpstart that, and those have been approved, and they're moving forward with those programs now. So,
And the guidance just came out actually for the heavy duty side, I think, last week. So the PUC is now moving on the heavy duty side.
right, yeah, which is a little complicated, but gonna get there. So charging infrastructure for heavy duty vehicles. Larry, you had your card up first, and then.
I will, and I'll be quick. I got a little story that I think is apropos, but I've learned long ago that he who talks long with lunch in the room never talks again, so. I think all of us, if you're thinking about impactful vehicles, especially back to the city government side of the thing, is trash trucks are the worst. They're on streets that were never designed for that type of capacity. Years ago, there was one trash truck a week. Now there's 3. They're obnoxious. They're noisy. They always show up at 6:35 in the morning to pick up all the trash.
How they manage to show up everywhere at
Everywhere.
6:35?
It's a great mystery. So our story was in our city is we had a fleet of 15 trucks. They were all diesel. We needed to figure out a way to get some sort of compliance. So we started filtering trucks and ruining motors. This isn't working. We tried some LPs, they were better on that, and then lo and behold, the council decided the best thing to do is let the trash haulers professionals take care of this. Contracted that service out to CR&R. Was a great move, but they're still obnoxious trucks that show up at 6:35 in the morning. So I don't know where the technology is at. They're cleaner, but they're there 3 times. The good news is they're not traveling as far to offload because they got MRFs, and now we're doing a better job of managing our trash, but there's a place that if somebody wanted the most community impact on how do we fix this, because week after week after week in council meetings, that's the one complaint that always came about it. And plus the city always complains because you got great impact on your community, your streets and all that. So I don't know where the technology is and how much demand is for those being zero emission or electric, but if that technology is moving forward, I think trash trucks will give you, on a public community side, the most impact.
So, go ahead.
We are working with CR&R, in fact, on
Very good company.
on 0.02 grams, so the ultra low NOx engine. They've agreed to put those into their trash trucks, so it won't negate a lot of the other noise that you hear from curbside.
Well, the hydraulics
pickup.
and things like that. That's
Right.
ultimately they need to get to that point. So.
But we funded them to do a project out in Paris where they're creating renewable fuel from the trash, and then putting it into these ultra low NOx engines. So it shows kind of this nice circle of renewable fuel into super clean natural gas technology, and then using it to do pickup of the materials that they would bring back to create the fuel. So it's an interesting story. For battery electric, and Bill might have more to say, the typical issue is that just the sheer weight could be more detrimental to the streets, and so that's a concern.
Well, I live in Anaheim, and we have Republic, and today this morning is my.
6:35?
They were 6:35.
No, actually about 7 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, they were.
But it's a delight to have them come. I mean, they're quiet, and sometimes I don't even hear them.
Yeah,
And
but
even the hydraulics.
I mean, and they're probably all the 2010 compliant heavy duty natural gas engines, but these 0.02 engines, they're the ones that have been approved, the 8.9 liters. Those are the perfect size.
Yeah, that is the
So
perfect size.
they're gonna go into the trash trucks and the buses before the bigger engines, which are just going to get approved and certified next year. We hope early next year we'll start going into the heavy duty trucks.
It's an interesting platform, and I agree that I think the 8.9 is, and particularly if you can start putting renewable natural gas with an 8.9, that's a really good combination. But there are some people working on zero emission. So Motive is a group up in Northern California. They've got a number of them in demonstration trash trucks.
Cool.
They've got some in Sacramento and some in Chicago.
BYD has in
BYD.
China, but not here.
BYD is exploring it.
Yeah.
So there's other people looking at it. And then there's a number of hybrid companies who are looking at it, and they haven't been able to make it work in a business case yet. But they are looking at it because 60% of the energy in a trash truck is driving it, 40% is actually actuating all the hydraulics to crush, move, and with the new phase 2 rules, there's actually that idling engine component is actually going to be, if you can reduce that, you'll get rewarded in the new, that's one of the good things about phase 2. So I think there's going to be a drive to do more with those auxiliary systems. The thing that's really noisy on those trucks
It's the compressor.
is the compressor.
That's the thing. And we tried to mandate with CRNR that they would do all the trash compression outside the neighborhood. Couldn't afford that because they would add 4 or 5 new trucks to it.
Right.
Because these trucks run, 1,000, pickups a
Yeah,
day.
the side loads.
But we wanted, that was the biggest complaint, is when you compress, compactor trucks, they want to do them outside the neighborhood, and they said, you can't afford to do that.
So I think we could even see at some point electrified compression, electric over hydraulic compression in a natural gas truck. So it's a changing space. It is actually a pretty interesting space.
Okay. Art, you're
Well,
the one thing holding us up from lunch.
Well,
See?
and I'm not gonna.
You went early, huh?
And I'm not gonna be a softball question. One of the things is this rich about California, it's a diverse community. But I don't see it in the nonprofits, I don't see it in the businesses, and I don't see it in the regulatory and policy making, up from whether it be management all the way down. But I think we have an opportunity because right now on the education, the children that are coming in are English learners, 40% of them that are coming into the schools. The legislature, the leadership is diverse, at least in the bottom house and now on the upper house, and soon hopefully at the governor's level. Where the question lies is that sooner or later it's going to have to diversify. Now in Hemet and some of the other Anaheim Hills or such, they enjoy the benefits of all the infrastructure, all the services that are housed in the environmental justice communities. So all the idling trucks, all the transfer stations, all located in the neighborhoods for the constituencies that I work with. What I'd like to see is a comprehensive program that combines not only the technology, but also combines the education and it intertwines as we develop over the years. Because if you're gonna look for support from us, whether it be in Washington or in Sacramento, for these programs, it's not gonna be there if we're not at the table. Because what normally is like one of the congressional, a friend of mine, Linda Sanchez used to say, Art, if we're not at the table, we end up usually being the meal.
Yeah, you're on the menu.
And so, as we move to become those chair people and those key committees and those leadership roles, we need to have that. We can no longer wait for the rhetoric or the goodwill for people to do that. And I just want you and hopefully everybody else to take that message back. Because as we work with labor, as we work with community groups, as we work on litigation groups, we're not coming in to save the spotted owl. We're coming in to save our communities and the economy and infrastructures that we're inheriting that are bankrupt, socially, mentally, and leadership and morally. So we need that change. And Dr. Lou knows, because we work with that leadership.
Well, I will say, one of the things that I've been really impressed about with everybody saw SB 32 get signed. There are a number of other bills that did get signed, and all of them really took a new model for climate change down to the community level. And it has been a sea change that California right now is leading. And the last one that got signed was SB 1383. It got signed earlier this week. And that's actually also really exciting. So as we're doing things that will actually have really big impacts on climate, we're actually cleaning up communities where people are bearing the biggest brunt. So it's in black carbon, it's in methane release and other things.
We need these type of pilot programs, and the guy that's a gardener, the guy that drives a truck, they're needed in the school districts. Even if I have a small truck or a small vehicle, I need those type of pilot programs.
Well, I know, Art, I would agree with you, and I think this is something I'd love to follow up with you. This voucher program that I run for the state called HVIP, which is now means the heavy-duty voucher incentive program, we put out about 2,400 clean trucks. Our 2,000th clean truck was actually a two-truck operation. It was out in San Bernardino County, small family that just had those two trucks, but they were able to buy a hybrid as opposed to a conventional vehicle because of this program at no net cost to them. And it took their risk away, and they ended up loving it and adopting it, and they've become kind of a, if you will, they've been able to carry that message, but we need more of that education, that we can get these 75% of the vouchers in HVIP are in disadvantaged communities. I'm actually really proud of that. Doesn't get talked about enough. We gotta get more people seeing it, feeling it, and talking about it. So I agree with that.
Because the heavy duty equipment tends to be in those communities.
Yeah.
So I think we need to eat lunch.
Yeah, I do too. So why don't we do this?
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Oh,
No.
You have something you wanted to say?
Wait a
So
minute, my
we
card
have to
failed.
start.
I can ask you while I'm making the sandwich.
Okay.
You know,
Susan's been very patient and waiting.
Yeah.
On agenda item number 6, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer. Why don't we take 10 minutes to, bio break and lunch break. Folks on the phone, we encourage you to do the same. We're gonna reconvene at about 12:15, right at 12:15.
Jerry, you want to say something? We want you to read together.
Are you gonna take public comment, Dr. Wu, after?
Yeah, sure. You got an opinion on this?
Yeah, because I was really afraid to say anything. I would have been the last person,
Yeah, we'll take public comment afterwards.
because I wouldn't want you to be a violation.
Yeah, you wouldn't. Since you didn't say anything all day.
I know.
Now you're ready.
I thought Phil was gonna bring
I watched
break
it on
bag
the
first. Oh, you'll get it.
from Hawaii. We were all sick, so don't envy me. I had sick children, I had sick children. All three of them
You never
were
eat.
sick.
So desperate.
They actually went to Kaiser. And now I have my own one that I would take. The volcano did not.
You get into the
I was missing selling power. I could, but I
Next week, because of that.
Yeah.
I do, I don't wanna be a
They're
mission.
gonna focus all down.
Yeah, I think it is, but I thought I'm not involved with
Yeah.
it, but I thought we have enough staff there, we've been talking about our meeting farm docs, everything's come monitoring the efficiency or whatever.
Yeah, we're not-
There's something why.
So I'm trying to get you from zero. Optimism.
Yeah.
Well, they're trying to do stuff right.
Oh.
I think George.
It's not. Oh, I know, I do that.
But he's
I
actually.
do that as a reciprocating.
So he's helping out.
Susan, I've been waiting for this update. I've been emailing you about it. Perfect.
No, I haven't.
Sure, yeah, I'll email it to her.
Yeah, no, what is the population?
I go home and then I do whatever I have to do with the kids and then I usually do more.
Yeah.
I know, it's. Well,
you have.
Yeah, well, I think, rules is like, it's a continual.
We're talking about.
The ones that were. I know.
I mean, it's not an actual work. I understand from my
Yeah.
we do so many different issues, but when somebody wants updates, it's like.
I know.
And the reviews process.
Eventually.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, we don't have to work, but everybody wants to hear what I'm doing.
Yeah. So true. Don't wanna hire an intern. I have staff that usually will, put it generally together, but then, I'm pretty particular, so that.
Yeah, and I think, we're looking at
So we're excited about that. So we said it, we heard that, the first piece of poll, you were available. I have the camera. So you are gonna be available? Oh, good. How's that? That's a great guy.
That doesn't, it doesn't make sense, but you're right.
That's still to the extent that it's subsidized, right?
Well, that's the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on like groups, like you have people like to say.
You said that you're. I mean, everything that take out.
Because I know that those that are range
You're the lunch speaker, huh?
I'm a lunch speaker. Hopefully I won't upset your lunch.
Yeah. It isn't, again, it isn't with the technology.
I have a copy of your bond. I don't have one.
So it technically can be done, demonstration. Because it's a pilot.
called Snow Monster. That's on Second Street along Beach Road. It looks like snow, like real fine and everything, no flavor in it, with like taro or milk or whatever. Put things on it, like little salt, whatever. So that is just killing my. And then one other thing, they make fresh ice cream. And they make ice cream sandwich. That's doing that on Sundays, and I'm like, you know what, I gotta stop this, because there's so many others that it's always like, bye.
We'll have to check that out. What's it called? What's the
No, they're monster.
What's the monster? Okay, monster.
Snow is what they. It's really.
I live in LaSalle, so it's like, that's not far.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gonna have some lunch here with us?
I might have to do
The least we could do, Bill, is provide you some fun.
I'll grab something on the way out, Joe, but thank you.
He lives with the other part of the place.
So, we just have public comment. I wanted to ask a question about.
CEO says, aren't you gonna go to school so you can learn finance? Nothing runs.
You can use your slides at the Port of Los Angeles work group that Matt and I are on.
So Susan has Marina with the second week of school, right? Yeah, she's kind of struggling a little. Big step up. But we knew with my oldest one, he dived.
Could you just email me a copy of it or something?
Yeah. You know, Sarah's, she's waking up late, 5:30. I know, Marina's too. Yeah, she's getting up so early to, whatever she didn't finish, she's trying to finish. Yeah.
Right
The
now,
high
I'm
school's
working on
it's rigorous, yeah.
campaign
Yeah.
for school.
She's doing a lot of the honors classes.
Yeah, she's got all honors. Some of the things that I'm looking at are small partnerships.
Oh, good.
She's doing 6 months, 4 months, 3 months training certification.
Again, I'm just
And medical,
Yeah.
big thing in education, special ed.
Too much
Not a lot of
pressure on
kids
kids.
have,
There is too much pressure, I totally
To
agree.
get into college and everything.
Yeah.
you know, stuff that you don't need a
So we already
Two years
changes.
degree or
It's been
or 4 year degree. And I went to those programs in Mexico.
aspects
All
over
the
over time. Even our existing
Right.
vehicles, I
A lot of
think
water,
that's
sewer,
power,
and
most people realize.
No, I
So maybe we'll make changes as needed, but.
I still think we're close.
I wonder how, I don't know legally how far we
Oh, we have that with our youngest one. Yeah. We
On
had
public
this-
fleets, our
The one that has to say what's wrong, because nobody else tells us.
They're 2 years old and just, you know, things.
I'm usually not the guy that a lot of people like to see it.
No, yeah.
You know?
After
When I
this.
showed up there, when all the staff says that one is aware.
Yes.
They have to be certain guys.
Yeah.
We've got around that.
A little
Yeah, I
awkward.
always tell parents, it's like, it's,
Essentially,
you know,
That was the thing at the time.
unless your kid is really destined for the IVs, it's like, I don't know what you're doing.
One client
Yeah.
I had, I went to a city,
About
a lawyer comes up and
childhood.
so I don't know what he was there
Gotten
for.
around the methanol equivalent.
He said, I haven't seen
It's
it.
really only this much of their whole entire life.
And the city manager, cause how you know this guy? No, he's our lawyer, we use him
I'm not
for
the expert.
Yeah.
brutality
I think
cases.
you can require like the cleanest available.
Right.
Says, have you had one? Yeah.
Oh, how far you go in your life.
So
You know,
he
the
says,
utility reform network is about a month ago.
Equal existing.
Look at that.
Yes,
Wow.
you need good education.
Karen,
It should be very clear.
They don't treat them with IVs.
Yeah.
Best jobs. Around the table.
Tyron, you got a question about
Oh, when we're finished.
item 5, right, before? Yeah, okay, so did Rita, who's back
So,
there.
short answer, I think it's doable, I don't think it's guaranteed.
Well, actually, it is 12:15.
You know what I mean? But I think a lot of people think, oh, okay, well, we just said we're gonna do it, so
No, no,
it must happen. I think it's gonna
She can go
take,
next. Go ahead.
I mean, I think the technology.
So Bill and, well, Matt's not even here. Let's wait till Matt gets back in.
The technology.
Technology.
I'm sure he's coming back.
That way, I think, you
Oh,
know,
you
if
went to
we
that
could
one?
figure out some
Okay.
other things.
Go ahead and
that
ask your
get
question then.
people
I
over
hope that
that
Bill
first
can answer.
risk barrier. I think, because the prices are, they're still high, but they're coming down. I mean, they're headed the right direction.
Bill, I had a question.
Yeah.
Your program, I was looking up online, CalSTART. So do you guys offer training for people? Is that correct?
No, we don't. We know it's needed, but that's not what CalSTART itself does. No, we work with, I've worked with community colleges and others who do the training.
To develop curriculum?
Yeah, we can help with curriculum, we've done.
LA Trade Tech, maybe.
Okay. But do you guys hire people with criminal backgrounds?
God, I hope not.
Well, you know, off the record. Know what I mean by that?
Well, those are elected to office.
Right.
No politicians.
Because one of the things we're looking at, you know, people in these re-entry programs, I mean, people who had criminal history in the past, I should say. And people that are homeless vets programs and stuff like that. Are they involved in?
They're more of a
So CalSTART itself.
high-tech consulting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys
We're
don't actually
more-
make the buses, right?
No, we do not.
Okay.
We do not make the buses. Our member companies do, and we work with them, and we work with partners who are going to be doing the training, but CalSTART itself doesn't do the training.
That's a great question for the member company, so.
Okay.
So if I come to you guys in my district and I got a kitchen I wanna revamp, or I got equipment out there, you could help us. Because that's what I did when I worked in Mexico. We went out to other groups. And then they came to us and by look and say, okay, there's a possible market. Somebody may be willing to do the research in the niche. And then work with us to try to solve it.
We can, and it really depends on the application and whether we've got the skill set for it. You know, our skill set is, for instance, we do transportation, but we don't necessarily do locomotives. We do on-road and off-road vehicles, light-duty vehicles, and some mobility, transit buses and fuels. But even port cranes, while we are aware of the technology sets involved, that's not really our prime fit. We see some really good crossover on some of the core components between trucks and some of the electrification of port equipment. So we'll do mobile port equipment, we don't do heavy cranes.
Wasn't Lee Iacocca your first CEO?
No, a guy named Mike Gage.
Mike Gage. I thought Lee Iacocca was.
He wouldn't give us the time of day in those. Chrysler didn't want to talk to CalSTART in the early days, but they are a member now, or Fiat Chrysler, as they're now known. and GM and Toyota and Ford, you go down the list. So, I mean, we do have those companies as members. Most of our members are mid-size and small tech innovators or developers.
Forklifts, do you guys do forklifts?
We're involved, one of our member companies is Nuvera, which is fuel cell maker. They're owned by Hyster, which is the biggest forklift maker in the world. So yes, we do work with them.
And fuel cell forklifts are now very viable.
It's one of the breakout success stories of
Yeah.
fuel cells, is in the forklift.
No one's really paying attention to it, but that's actually where it's really working.
Because in the mines, we have the big trucks, you know, to put this whole room in one of those, and they're electrical. They go down and then they come back up.
Those are on catenary.
Dr. Lou, are they having fuel cells in a broad spectrum of forklifts, or is it just the indoor warehouse type or the construction site?
I'll turn that one over to Mark. Mark, you know? He knows, but he can't tell you.
Just like sitting here the whole time.
Until you take a bite, that's the only time you can ask a question.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I have no idea. But no, you know, we were talking about fuel cells with forklifts, and I was wondering if it's across the industry. There's warehouse versions, there's construction versions, there's big wheels, there's towables. I'm just curious if the fuel cells are working their way out.
Class 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
There you go, there's your answer.
But having said that, there's some of the member companies we're working with who would like to get into heavy lift devices using fuel cell because it actually is a good technology for that. So we may be talking to Dr. Miyasato and his team on those topics.
Does fuel cell use lithium also?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
The batteries associated.
the batteries associated with fuel cell,
They're
lithium.
usually hybrid systems.
Yeah, mostly hybrid. Electric.
So it'll be interesting to see in a couple, maybe 10 years, what the regulation would be on lithium, mining lithium. I think most
Yeah.
cars come from Nevada. And
Most people don't take a look at that wells to wheels or cradle to grave
right.
part of it, but yeah, that's, people are starting to think more about that because of actually the climate impacts. So they're, you know, when they're talking about doing the natural gas vehicles, they want to make sure it's renewable gas, because then if you do a very low emission natural gas vehicle, the argument is that they're actually cleaner than electric vehicle, depending on where you're getting your electricity from in terms of climate impact. So it's an interesting.
Or where you're getting the lithium from.
Or where you're getting the lithium from the battery and what happens, but yeah.
There's also the geopolitics of it. I think people have looked at sourcing and making sure that you have access to those sources. I mean, we know where we get a fair amount of petroleum as well as domestically. On lithium, the United States actually is a fairly large producer of lithium. South America is a fairly large producer of lithium. So
It's a byproduct.
you just create some additional partners in different parts of the world.
Well, I know the lithium stock is doing very well.
Yeah.
Where I grew up in mines in Arizona.
Well, we're not here to advise you on investments.
Oh, no.
That's- You'll have to deduce that yourself. So, item 5, why don't we go to public comment? Because I understand we have a member of the public who would like to address us.
Yes,
So,
I'll be very
I'll read
brief.
it.
Rita Luke with RadTech International, and thank you for the excellent presentation. Our members, even though we're on the stationary side of the house, we see a lot of the same trends. And Bill was absolutely right. I mean, small businesses and medium-sized businesses, businesses in general, are loath to adopt a new technology. And it is a risk. So we definitely welcome any kind of incentive. But I wanted to speak to the issue of policy making. And I agree that regulations can drive that conversion. But also what we see in our industry is that rolling back regulation also sends a signal. And that's the area that we like to operate in, because we feel that's a non-financial incentive from the district's perspective, but to our members, that has a cost savings associated with it. So I urge the district, as I have been in the past, to consider that, rolling back some of the regulation. I'm not saying roll back the standard or backslide, because I know that's a no-no, but where you can spare some rolling back, like in the area of record keeping, reduce red tape. I think that's definitely a barrier that's there where the district has a lot of leeway in removing that. Thank you.
Great. Phil and I were talking during the break about the possibility, if at all, to leapfrog any of those steps along both of your processes, which I think we agree that it's probably impossible to leapfrog any of those steps, but maybe the opportunity lies in accelerating them. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes, I would, and so I think two things on that. I have found working, it's certainly, the small innovators can actually leapfrog them much more quickly, and one of the benefits is they move fast, they're small business, and that's great, they move much more quickly. The danger sometimes is they don't do all the full validation of the final product that you might want in that time frame. We need to find some merger of those two, the processes of the larger folks combined with the innovative speed of the smaller companies. But I think you can do a couple things there. I think that this demo money, for instance, on the zero emission drayage, is speeding, it's accelerating something. These guys were working on this technology, they weren't going to bring it forward on this time. This has definitely sped it up. They've seen an interest or a future potential requirement or demand, and they've gotten assistance to move their own portfolio forward. Secondly, I think there's a lot of stuff that can be done in parallel.
Yeah, and the requirement to have OEMs involved made a difference, right? I mean, you basically said, right, Matt, you said you have to have an OEM partner to the smaller ones.
Well, what's even stronger than that is that we will only contract with the OEM. So the OEM had to be the prime contractor to us. In previous contracts or projects, it was the integrator, and then we said, you have to have a partner at least, or you have to have experience with the technology in a different platform like buses. But to your point, Dr. Liu.
Kind of bringing them to the table despite themselves.
Right, they were kicking and screaming. But to your point, and to what Bill was mentioning is, these small integrators, entrepreneurial firms, they don't know what they don't know. And so they say, oh yeah, we can do that. And then it's a hand-built truck and you only get one. Or you get 4 hand-built trucks that are, each one is slightly different. So first requiring them to work and partner with the manufacturer, and then making the manufacturer actually the responsible party, only came about through evolutionary thinking from us in the state, and then the large amount of cap and trade revenue that was put toward the project. It's almost fully funding their program, so why wouldn't they, right? So the next step is then ensuring it's successful and then getting it to manufacturing.
Okay. So do we have any other questions or comments on item 5? If there's anyone on the phone, now's your opportunity to. Okay, well this was fantastic. Thanks, Bill, for coming. We appreciate it. We rarely have invited people from outside the Home Rule Advisory Group to come and make these kind of presentations outside of staff, and this worked really well for us, so we might be asking you to come back at some point.
All right, be happy to.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Okay. And 2.5 hours later, Susan, you have your presentation on the ARB oil and gas regulations and how it applies to our South Coast rulemaking. So, without further ado.
Okay, so we were asked to put together a presentation that talks about sort of the interaction and of some regulations that have recently promulgated and then that are in the midst of being promulgated at the state level, and then some of our existing rules, and then where we're going on natural gas storage. So what I'll do is kind of give you, an overview of some of these regulations. So EPA in 2012, they have a new source performance standard. So they had amended their regulation to essentially require additional requirements for new natural gas wells. And one of the main requirements was to establish what they refer to as green completions for whenever they're doing hydraulic fracturing for natural gas wells. And at that time, and a little before that time, there was an overwhelming discussion about the hydraulically fractured wells that were and how these, not only just the chemicals that were being used, but also the activities in terms of it's called flowback fluid that comes back to the surface and how it was being handled, so.
Susan, I just have to say, I wish Amy were here, because what we have is NSPS 40 CFR Part 60, subpart, Really?
They actually refer to it, in the next one, it's subpart OA, which is, they call it Quad OA.
Quad OA,
Yeah, so this is Quad O, so, so in subpart, Quad O. So what the green completions do is it essentially is that it requires facilities to either to capture the VOC emissions that are coming back to the surface as they do the well completion and their hydraulic fracturing operations, and then capture that natural gas, and then probably they're going to reuse it into their process. And that in terms of the applicability for the South Coast Air Basin. What we're seeing in our air basin and what we have believed in, and we have a rule 1148.2, which required facilities to notify us when they're doing these different types of well completions, is that we have very few wells that are being, number one, that are being drilled for gas, and number two, we have very few types of well completions that they're hydraulically fracturing. So that's what what we had started to see as we started collecting the information. So in terms of the applicability of this particular provision, it's not all that applicable in our air basin, because our wells are oil and not gas, and we see very few hydraulically fractured wells. So in 2016, they another amendment to the new source performance standard, subpart Quad OA, and what they did was they expanded the applicability to include not just the natural gas wells, but to include oil wells, and then they applied the green completion standard to the oil wells. They also incorporated what we refer to as LDAR standard, leak detection and repair requirements, for using method 21, which you take a hand probe and to measure the VOC emissions. And their standard is a leak detection limit of 500 ppm. And as we get through the presentation, I'll talk about other standards in our rule and in the CARB regulation to give you a little more perspective. And it's not so much of our concern in the 500 ppm, but it's the length of time that the EPA regulation allows for the repair, which is repair in 30 days and then up to 2 years if there's a requirement to shut down the particular piece of equipment, which we think is it is a very long time period.
And that's a VOC emission?
Right.
And it doesn't designate like if it's all benzene or something?
No. And then the other, I think, notable part in subpart in Quad OA is that it was the first time that EPA allowed the use of the OGI, it's the optical gas imaging cameras, in lieu of method 21. So this was kind of a big shift, and so that we felt like, that's kind of a notable piece in this, and as we start talking about the underground storage tank regulation or rule that we're working on, where we see that might be able to fit in. So now looking at the state regulation, which is still a proposed regulation, is that the focus on this regulation is on greenhouse gas emissions. And the overall applicability is like there's a number of different categories that they identify, but it's really about on and offshore oil and gas wells, and then they also included natural gas processing, and then they added natural gas underground storage facilities. So just to give kind of a really a big overview, it's a pretty hefty regulation. Trying to synthesize it into one slide in terms of the general provisions of the rule is that it has requirements for active and idle wells. It establishes requirements for vapor recovery, leak detection and repair, the LDAR requirements, and then it also has equipment replacement requirements. And then there's a pretty substantial section that addresses the underground natural gas storage facilities, which I'm going to delve into a little more. And then this regulation is proposed to be adopted in spring of 2017. So CARB's approach for the monitoring for the underground natural gas storage facilities it's really a kind of a three-pronged approach. And the first approach is that facilities would be required to submit a monitoring plan. And the CARB regulation is a little bit vague in terms of some of the specifics in terms of how many monitors, location of monitors, and gives a lot of, it gives general guidelines, but a lot of empty holes in terms of how the monitoring plan would be structured. But it has two major parts to it. The first part, that there'd be ambient monitor, doesn't specify the details in the ambient monitors in regards to, is it fence line monitors, is it community monitors, doesn't establish a threshold. And then it gives the operator the choice of either doing daily screening using method 21 with a probe going at each device or component, or they can use the optical gas imaging. So you would use the camera to look at certain specific areas of the facility to identify where there could be a leak. Or they have the option to have continuous monitors, and then there would be some remote area where they'd have an audible and visible alarm system so they can monitor if there is a leak. The second prong is the audiovisual inspections, and this is where they would do daily inspections throughout their facility by all their components that are applicable under the rule, and they would basically be listening for any type of hissing or sounds that would be indicative of a leak, or there would be visual inspections for any droplets or anything visible that they can see in terms of a leak. And then the requirement is that they would have to repair these leaks within 24 hours unless they then take the method 21 with a probe, measure it, and then if depending on the level of the leak, then they would have different repair times associated with that. And then the third prong is the LDAR requirements, which would the facility would have to do quarterly monitoring with method 21 with the probe, and then they would have repair times that would vary, and I have the details of the repair times, and they have a two-step compliance schedule for that. So the leak detection, the LDAR requirements is going to be implemented in two phases. The first phase in 2018, second phase in 2020. It has different leak thresholds, and based on the leak threshold, there's different repair times. The most notable part that I'd like to highlight to you is that the CARB regulation has a provision for what they refer to as critical components, and those are components at the facility that they feel that are they're critical to the operation of the facility, and that they can't make the repair unless they have to shut down the facility. And so they would allow the facilities, if it is identified as a critical component, that they would have up to 180 days to make that repair. Just to kind of go way back in our Rule 1173, where we have requirements, leak detection requirements, the issue of critical components came up in the initial promulgation of Rule 1173. And it was actually WISPA who brought the issue up of the need for a provision for critical components. And so as we started looking at the CARB regulation and kind of resurfacing this issue again, we went back to 10 years worth of hearing board data to see how many facilities regulated under 1173 have made an argument to our hearing board saying they needed additional time because the component was critical to their operation, and they had to wait for a turnaround or a shutdown. We found none. So, and that was, our concern initially when back when 1173 was adopted. Now looking, many years later, the need for that provision. We understand where CARB's position is on that, but that's something as we start moving forward in our oil and gas regulation, that it's probably something that we wouldn't allow. We haven't allowed it for many years, and why would we go backwards on that provision? So now looking at our AQMD rules and regulations for oil and gas, there's a number of rules and rules that we have that do affect oil and gas operations, but I wanted to highlight the two main ones as they would relate to natural gas storage. So the first one being Rule 1148.1 for oil and gas wells, and then Rule 1173, which is basically our rule for our LDAR rule. So Rule 1148.1, it covers three, actually I'd say four main air quality issues. One being total organic compounds, one being VOCs, volatile organic compounds, third one being toxic air contaminants, and then the fourth being odor nuisances. So there's various elements in the rule, and it has really looks at the oil wells and oil and gas wells from the time the well is completed. So after the well has been drilled, it's in, and the well is already starting production, it's from that point from production on to the well being abandoned or being finished. So the rule has prohibitions for venting gas. It has does have an LDAR element to it. It does have requirements for odor nuisances. If there's if the facility has so many events of an odor nuisance, the confirmed odor event, that then they have to submit a specific cause analysis report to our agency and then submit an odor mitigation plan. Rule 1173, which is our main rule for leak detection and repair, it has a broad applicability to refineries, chemical plants, oil and gas, natural gas processing. It has, similar to the CARB regulation, it has a daily audio-visual check of components, and then it has the main portion of the rule, which is the LDAR provisions. It relies on Method 21, quarterly inspections, and then it has specific leak requirements. The rule does exclude sources that are handling or components that are handling commercial grade natural gas, and so that's where the CARB regulation will kind of pick up. So there's a gap there that we feel that we'll have to go back to 1173 to probably amend to shore up with the CARB regulation. So in terms of the LDAR requirements for Rule 1173, there's no requirement for critical components. The repair times are not far off from CARBs. They're a little more stringent. And then when CARB gets to their final limits, and I'll show a comparison table, Rule 1173 is a little more stringent.
I have a question for you, Luan.
Sure.
Why, so the CARB regulations are not just applying to underground storage?
No.
They're applying to everything. 'Cause that
It's
seems,
real broad applicability.
it just seems really odd to be applying 1173 to commercial natural gas. It's been so many years that it applied, and now.
It'll take it to, I think the point of the facility where, before it's transmitted beyond the facility. So there's like just a small gap that we see, and we're still, trying to fully understand like where the CARB regulation, where 1173 ends and the CARB regulation picks up, and where the CARB regulation will end. So there's a portion of that in terms of the transmission through the facility after the processing that we think is the area where it's gonna be missing, so. The comparison, looking at EPA Quad OA, CARB regulation 1173, 1148.1, in terms of the different affected sources. In terms of the pollutants that we're looking at, we have EPA and CARB that are looking at methane. Our Rule 1173 focuses on the criteria pollutants. 1148.1 has kind of a mixture of criteria pollutants as well as toxic air contaminants. They all have varied equipment. Most of them are focusing on wells, wellheads, things that are occurring above ground in terms of the production. In terms of the monitoring, there's quarterly requirements and there's daily requirements on the audio-visual inspections, but for Method 21, in terms of the LDAR requirements, they're generally quarterly. Yes?
This is all, it sounds like you're trying to, mitigate what's there, but I think a lot of times when you're trying to mitigate, you gotta find out, given a lot of these wells, the age, how old, has anybody run an audit as to see, because it's like, if I got a fleet of vehicles, and some of these wells may go back to the early 1900s, and they've never been the equipment's still there from the 1900s, it's over 100 some years old. And I run into this with cities where sewer lines, water lines, the guy that put them in, if he died, nobody knows where they're at, or the equipment. Has anybody done a physical audit as to what you actually have? And can what you're trying to propose actually mitigate what is there and what may have to be completely rechanged?
Yeah.
You understand what I'm
yeah.
saying?
I understand what you're saying in regards to, in terms of an audit of the existing wells, the answer is no, we have never done an audit of the existing wells.
So how are you gonna try to mitigate something if you don't know what you have?
So,
Well,
let me
I think
add
that
something. So are the primary authority over the wells themselves, the integrity of the wells, the age of the wells, location of the wells, and regulation of the wells is another
Somebody
agency, a state agency, DOGGR, the Department of Oil and Gas and Geothermal.
Division of Oil, Gas,
Division.
Geothermal Resources within the Department of
So
Conservation.
whatever happens underground, the integrity of the wells, the age, location, they're responsible. And recently, they have really upped their efforts to look at the inventory of
But you
wells, the age
understand,
of the wells.
so I guess the problem is it goes back to what you said, where does one begin?
Right, so that's, okay,
And where does one start?
Right.
Because if, it's like, I gotta take trust that I'm gonna be the pilot on that plane, and hoping that somebody put enough gas and check the engines are running.
So Dogger has an extensive database of existing and previous wells. I don't know how accurate it is, but they have a whole heck of a lot of data and a whole heck of a lot of wells that go back to
There's an example in
when well drilling first began.
There's an example, somebody's, on somebody's yard, just west of downtown recently, they had some H2S smell, some rotten egg smells, and,
Well casing?
what's that?
Well casing?
Yeah, and it turned out to be that there was an abandoned well, like, pretty much in his yard, and he finally dug it up himself and found that there was a hole there. And this well was drilled in like, year 1900 or so. And that's the area where actually the first oil well in all of Southern California was drilled. This may not have been the one, but it was probably one of the first oil wells ever drilled. And you look at an old oil well, it's like a hole in the ground with some 2x4s. It's a hole in the ground.
It's a historical site.
Yeah.
Don't touch.
So Dogger, came in and we did some helped with some monitoring, but there's a lot of wells like that. So that issue does exist, and Dogger is, from my understanding, has really re-upped their efforts to try to identify. There's a huge inventory of those old wells that they're trying to move through.
See, I thought you were gonna say that he then fracked the well, pumped the oil, established a refinery in his front yard and no longer had to buy gas.
So yeah, it's an issue. Our role is, whatever the well condition is to avoid air emissions or toxic emissions or nuisance emissions. So, we have to work with Dogger and other agencies on that. But when it start going below ground and the age of the well, we start losing our
No,
authority.
but some of the equipment, because the tendency, a lot of management people, and I've seen it in government, is they leave it to the next administration, and nobody fixes it since from 1930 to 2030. So, because they keep leaving it to fix it for the other guy. So the above well stuff, which are the valves and the systems and the lines, like at my house, I got a gas line I smelled gas, because the gas line was not leaking, it was all rotted away. So that could be the same situation, 'cause a lot of these systems are galvanized or wood pipes. And so that, how are you gonna?
That's what the leak detection and repair program should definitely address, is that it requires them to not only use a device to measure if there's any concentration of VOCs that are coming from that particular device, but also, walking through on a daily basis to see if they smell or they hear something. So if they're smelling gas, then that would prompt them to then use the TVA to measure the concentration, and then if they measure something, then they're gonna have a certain amount of time that they have to repair it. So might require them to replace a valve, a flange, a portion of the pipe or something that is broken. So that's an element that we're gonna include in the proposed regulation, and is an element that in our existing rule 1173, that's what that whole rule is about, so.
Why don't you finish your presentation, Susan? You're almost done.
Okay, so, this is just comparing the CARB regulation to our rule 1173 in terms of the LDAR requirements. So, rule 1173 starts at a lower, concentration of 500 ppm, and then, has half the standard of what CARB's proposing in, their requirements for the LDAR requirements. The, repair times are, I would say, are roughly similar, because we have the repair time, and then we allow an extended period of time, which is similar to what CARB's regulation is. And then I think the big difference is in the critical components, where we don't have that provision. None of the regulations, except for the CARB proposed regulations, has a provision for natural gas storage operations. So we're proposing Rule 1148.3. It's under development right now. The initial concepts would be to focus on public nuisance as sort of the purpose of the rule. There's 4 facilities in our air basin. They're all owned and operated by SoCalGas, Aliso Canyon, Honor Rancho, Playa Vista, and Montebello. The general structure of the rule is that we would basically work off the CARB regulation, and then we would provide additional enhancements to the proposal. We would add more specificity than what's provided in the CARB regulation. So where it lacks specificity in terms of location of monitors, monitoring thresholds, and what happens when there is an exceedance of the thresholds, we would add those provisions in our rule. We would look at also considering a combination of Method 21 combined with possibly OGI or other technologies. We think that there's the two can really complement each other in terms of identifying leaks. And then we're also considering a public notification and communication element to the rule. The schedule for our rule is spring of 2017.
Susan, I just, since my folks have the production wells, 1148.3 is not going to address those folks, just those, the ones.
This is the 1148.3 is just the underground natural gas storage.
Okay, not production.
No, not production. The production really is 1148.1. And then there's another rule which we're working on. I don't know if it's going to be something that we're going to incorporate into 1148.1, or it's going to be an extension of 1148.2. But there's elements of wells as they're being completed, meaning that they're being fractured or acidizing or right before they start production. There's findings that we have that we want to incorporate into the rule. And we haven't decided exactly, which regulation that would fit in.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Dr. Susan, between now and spring 2017, can you give us a sense of perhaps the next steps you're going to be taking? How do you engage the stakeholders?
We're waiting to be
stakeholder. And how can we help?
Yeah, well, we're waiting for the stakeholders to let us come and visit your facility. So that's, like we
facilities.
Yeah, facilities. And because we're getting tired of waiting, we're probably going to be starting the working group meeting very soon. So we were hoping that we would be able to, start to do that first. That's typically what we'd want to do is, do our site visits, get a better lay of the land, and then, come out with a working group meeting. But we may actually sort of flip it on this one. Typically in our rulemaking process, we have several working group meetings. We have a public workshop. We'll brief our stationary source committee. We will then bring it to a set hearing and then a public hearing. So.
Sue, you understand all this stuff?
Yes.
Really? I mean, the Home Rule Advisory Group exists because we're trying to avoid we're supposed to talk about the mission. I'm not sure we're gonna have time to do it today, but we're supposed to avoid and comment on overlapping and overly complicated regulations. This might be one of the worst ones I've seen. I mean, EPA has a rule, ARB has a rule, and we've got 2. We're going for a 3rd. And they all seem to get it one piece or another, and they all have a rationale. Yet, if I were someone who was affected by this rule, I'd be pulling my hair out, having to monitor and report to 3 different agencies, basically about the same thing.
Yeah, CARB's regulation does have provisions in it that, where, you can have an agreement with a specific air district, where the air district can then, so our 1173, if we can subsume all the requirements for, if we already have our LDAR requirement, then they would just defer to our LDAR provisions in our rule 1173.
That would help.
Right, so,
So
they
they'd
would.
only have to, would they only have to report to us, or report to both at the same time, or?
No,
We
they-
can implement this, so
But-
one of our goals and why we'd be proposing to come back with regulations is, so our regulations would be at least as stringent as the federal and state, but anyone regulated has a one-stop. Just
Right.
comply with our
That would
rules
be
and
good,
you're
right?
guaranteed to comply with the other levels.
But I, you know, if I may, I was thinking more Title V certification and how that kind of comes into play. I mean, there's so many things that need to be vetted out.
That's still, we can't get out of the EPA role on that.
And so what about the record keeping and everything?
Yeah, right, I mean.
Well, we have requirements that I think are
compliance is one
already more stringent than even what
Yeah, there's.
federal and state. There's a
Yeah.
couple things in state now that they're focusing on methane that we might have to incorporate, but
Yeah, and
it's
there's a
not.
couple things on the well registrations, which we're gonna modify in our Rule 219 to shore it up with the CARB regulation. But there's certain, it is a little bit tricky in terms of, we are gonna ultimately have it as a one-stop shop, but there might be sort of an awkward point where it's like, because we're waiting for CARB to then move forward with the other part of 1173 that's covered. So do we move forward with 1173 and not have the remaining part of the refineries covered, or, you know, it's like, so there's a little bit of juggling in how we make that all work. But we want to try to make it as simple and straightforward for the affected facilities and then also our inspectors. So there's a lot that we're trying to make sure that we can make it all fit together.
So it seems like you guys should put out an RFP for a one-stop shop.
Well, I don't know if that's necessary, but we certainly need to work with EPA and ARB to try to come up with something that is a little simpler, both, I mean, for all parties involved, right? Be it the regulated entity needs a more straightforward and understandable, even though Sue understands it, to the regular human. You know, how to comply with this and keep the records and not be out of compliance for some strange reason because it was, you know, 49,999 instead of, you know, the 10,000 or something, that the level got mixed up because there's so many boxes and categories. And then to make it easier for us so that we can enforce it consistently and effectively and legally and, you know, and all that too. I think this is, I mean, we really do need to pull this together in a way that was the reason that this advisory group was formed in the first place.
We need some clarity.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, as straightforward, simple, and like you said, one stop as possible would be real helpful for these series of.
Dr. Lou, does this confusion sometimes come about because these agencies all have different goals and perspectives? And anybody get the people in the room and say, what's our goal, what's our perspective here, how do we?
That's why the
And maybe that's the simplest question that could have been asked.
Right, but it is,
is.
it's, I mean, we're trying to get a climate, we're trying to get a toxics, we're trying, you know, we're trying to deal with a bunch of different, yeah, and so there's a lot
And
going
the
on.
public needs to have a right to know that's getting fixed quickly.
Maybe this is something.
So we've been
maybe this is something we should discuss at our next meeting, or.
That's not a bad topic.
See how we can channel this, make it easier all the way around.
What would we talk about exactly?
Yeah,
Collaboration.
A methodology by which putting decision makers in the room, and not on a grand scale. I'm not talking, you know, going to Congress and saying we need a congressional act, because then states' rights jump in and say no, and everybody. But a way to put people in the room without all the resistance and the gravitas, and say what can we do?
And I guess, do you have instances where we've gone through things like this, where we've had, you know, issues of sort of overlapping regulations, we've gotten together with EPA and ARB and come out with something that is.
So this is actually a good example. So we've been commenting to CARB on this and working with CARB on this for a couple years now. And the things we're asking for are things that again, the delegation aspect, so we can be responsible for enforcement, so there's no double jeopardy with CARB inspectors and us going out there looking for different things. Consistency with the methods, the method 21 and the methods, so they don't require one method and we require another method, and everyone's out there with 2 handheld devices instead of 1. And my understanding is we weren't as involved, but CARB, when EPA was developing their reg, CARB and EPA were working together in the same way. So if you look at like the EPA reg and then the CARB reg and then where we are, it's probably increasing levels of stringency, but we're just trying to get it all to mesh together so we have the opportunity to have one rule that people have to comply with. And if you look back at some of the limits and timing of the EPA reg and the CARB reg, they were looking at 1173 was like their model already for how to set those things up. So we try to do that. We try to make it so there's not a reg passed at those other levels that put us in this bind already. So we can, we do this collaboration, but there's obviously could be more work done at the very
But
beginning.
you all use the term lead agency all the time, and maybe this is a good example of establishing a lead agency, where all these other requirements, if they do exist, feed in, and then you handle that.
I mean, it's encouraging to know that you're actually trying to do that. You're trying to get to that one-stop place, but
It's gonna come from a policymaker. At the end of the day, it's gonna have to come from a policymaker.
But Phil,
Well, it does.
that's a great statement that you guys are working on it. I think we'd like to be reminded of that on occasion. Because sometimes this goes on and I'm like you going, how do I track this? But I appreciate and respect the fact that you're willing to say we're working on that end. And I think that's a positive objective.
The reason I suggested this to this committee is CARB's reg is not final. This is in process still. So we're still working with CARB. They proposed the proposal to
I
the
think
board.
they're all the way to the 10-day changes, right? I mean,
They're almost, I don't know if they're to the SRP yet, but it's
It's not till next spring, so I think there's still time for comment.
there is.
Yeah, I think they've been to the CARB board once.
Right.
Yeah.
So
They
they go to
return
the
again.
second time is for, in theory, is to adopt the rule. And so they've had that set of rules, that draft rule that went to the board. They've accepted comments. Now they are working with individual parties from here into the next version. I mean, the spring is a little bit far. I think obviously if your information is they're going to be adopting in the spring, I think initially we understood February. So, so that process is going on. There's also like some applicability differences. As Susan reviewed the EPA's rules, those existing rules are on production wells, predominantly out in oil fields and places where people are producing oil and associated gas or gas. Like the gas company, we don't drill or any producing wells or operate producing wells. All our gas comes in from out of state or the few local producers that are there that give us gas into the system, and so we go in and out of storage, and then we distribute, within the basin. So there's some applicability stuff there.
On the, the 30,000 foot level, I mean, I could think of, like coatings and finishings and things that are regulated differently for consumers and for manufacturers and commercial, right? So there's possibility of this kind of coming up in there. Where are the other regulatory areas where things can get as complicated and strange as this? I mean, this one seems to certainly bring in all 3, EPA, ARB, and South Coast. Are there other regulatory categories of rules that we?
I think it probably can occur almost everywhere. It's like, one example right now is, the chrome plating. And you have, requirements.
Right, yeah, the PFOA.
Yeah, the PFAS and that issue. So it's like there's,
PFAS,
we try to work, within the structure and knowing that there's differences. You have a federal requirement, you have a state requirement, and then you have our requirements. And sometimes there might be, one agency that makes one change that, has an echoing effect on the other 2 agencies. And so it's, trying to figure that out.
And I know it's hard to believe, but we do actually, when these things happen, advocate on behalf of our regulated community
Right.
to
Yeah.
harmonize these things, because it puts us in a very awkward position to have to choose between these different pathways that might be conflicting,
Right.
so.
And the thing is, there's a certain familiarity, I mean, we may not like each other at times. Or, disagree, I guess I should say. But at least, there's that, businesses here are accustomed to dealing with you and less accustomed to dealing with some of the other agencies. And so,
You have the capacity to handle this work?
Part of the job, right?
Bring it on.
We have to, yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the job.
That's one of the other problems, they throw regulations and then you end up like B of A, there's a line of 20 people going to one teller,
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
We're hiring more inspectors.
Yes, we
more
are.
engineers.
We are. Are there any other things on this particular convoluted set of regulations that poor Susan has to deal with? Other comments on this? Thanks for bringing this to us. I do think that this, in terms of, what home rule is supposed to be about, this is exactly the kind of thing that is good to know about and try to understand. But I can pretty much guarantee you that if you ask me later this afternoon how this all works, I'm not gonna be able to tell you.
Well, bring these slides, because honestly, it's about as clear as.
Yeah,
I've
right,
seen.
exactly. No, you did a fantastic job of explaining it. It's just that without the slides, I'm not gonna be able to retain it.
She left off some of the gritty details.
Gritty
Yeah,
details.
there's
Because we only
there's
had.
a lot of
20
nitty
minutes.
gritty that it was just like, everyone would just be like, okay, it's lunchtime. So tried to keep it, yeah.
Okay,
But, and can you have Ann distribute the slides
Yes.
for us?
yeah, that'd be helpful because Susan had to put them up in her cubicle. Refer to them every other day. All right, any other comments, questions, items? Anyone on the phone? We've lost our member of the public over there. Really. Someone go find Rita. I don't know, Chris, are you still with us after all this time?
Yes, Dr. Lou.
Round of applause, huh?
You must get paid by the hour.
I don't, I'm salary.
That's really too bad. Do you have any updates from the Air Resources Board on regulatory activities under item 8?
Sure. Tomorrow is our board hearing. The first thing on the agenda is to consider the ozone designation recommendations for the 70 ppb. We have our recommendations out, they're out on the streets. Of course, EPA will then look at these and then they'll come out with their determinations October 1st, and then it gets published in the Federal Register.
Do you have anything beyond extreme for us?
No, not at this point. This is just designated attainment, non-attainment.
Oh, okay. I'll give you one guess where South Coast ends up then.
Yes. And then the next thing is we're going to discuss the state strategy for the SIP. And so in that, this is our mobile source, basically how we're going to help both South Coast, San Joaquin, as well as the rest of the state for transportation measures. So there's 4 pages of actual things that we're going to do as far as on-road light duty, on-road heavy duty, consumer products, off-road equipment, et cetera. We lay out our plan for that. And then the next, there's actually 3 regulations that are going together. They're not going to go together, they're going to go separate, but they all relate. And that is the amendments to the mandatory reporting, the amendments to our cap and trade program, and public hearing to consider the CPP, the Clean Power Plan for the Federal Clean Power Plan for California. So that's a pretty full day tomorrow.
Wow, okay. Thank you for the update. Any questions or comments for Chris at ARB? Anyone on the phone? No one else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for hanging on for all this time. I hope you got something out of this conversation. But no questions for you?
I did. I did all this. It's getting a little hungry, and I think maybe
got lunch here.
We have a sandwich here.
he brought me lunch.
We'll have to ship one to you next time.
Anyway,
Carbon neutral fashion.
Yeah, maybe we can look at CARB coming in at a time, if this is gonna be, I was out for a couple meetings, for business, and so I know that we've gone to every other month, and so maybe we can talk about when CARB can come in. I know this is a floating schedule, but maybe there could be something,
Yeah, we could.
that,
Put EPA and CARB. Yeah, we could also move you up on the agenda, I think, and do you earlier so you don't have to stick on the phone for 3.5 hours.
okay.
We'll consider that.
Maybe we can talk offline about it,
Okay.
or with Ann or something.
Yeah, why don't you coordinate with Ann, and then we'll take care of that. Jane, are you still there? Yeah. I assume there's no other comments.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Do you have anything on consensus building?
No, I don't this time, thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments on consensus building? Anyone? No, okay.
Well, let's start with the regulatory stuff.
What do you mean?
I'm being sarcastic.
I see, okay.
Yeah, we already looked at this, see if we can all
Right.
get on the same page on the
Okay.
regulatory.
Subcommittee status reports, Noel on freight.
So just very quickly, the Sustainable Freight Action Plan was released in July, end of July, right? And a couple things that I think are gonna be happening. So beginning late this summer, the state agencies will host meetings of both competitive and efficiency stakeholder work groups. Supposedly in October or so, the state agencies will discuss an action plan implementation with stakeholders at meetings at the California Strait Advisory Committee.
That's actually happened
It's
today,
happening
it's
right-
happening right now.
It's happening right now,
Yeah.
right. And, okay, so then by January, the state agencies will work on actions 1 and 2 to enact the freight transport funding package. I guess they're gonna be looking at funding opportunities here to distribute. It's the federal Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act funds. And then beyond that, it's obviously, that's the plan at least.
Okay. I would add 2 things to that. One, that the Port of Los Angeles has established an advisory group that Matt and I are on to come up with advice to the Port of Los Angeles on how to move clean freight forward. And they're also holding a series of public workshops or town hall type meetings beginning now in October. They were gonna do one in September, but the scheduling was kind of messed up. So some date in October they're looking at right now. They haven't identified it yet. And the second thing is that both ports, the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach, are looking to adopt a Clean Air Action Plan 3.0, so amending the Clean Air Action Plan that they have, and there may well include more aggressive drayage truck measures in that revised Clean Air Action Plan. So that's going to be on some time in the near future. They're going to start getting serious about the conversation.
We're meeting with them next week.
Yeah, to talk about it. I think there was going to be some more specific conversation with our advisory group next week about that too. So small business considerations, did we talk them all through, or do you have any more?
So I had one question, if I could, before you move on.
Sure.
I noticed also that the state rail plan is under development right now.
Oh, yeah.
And that there's a presentation at the CPAC today.
On that.
And I noticed on this, when I looked at the stakeholder group, I mean, there's a lot of different agencies and stuff on it, but I mean.
So you had a choice to go to both things, you came here. Okay.
They carbs on the stakeholder group, but there's no local district representation, and I didn't see EPA.
On the rail group?
Yeah. So it seems like there's, I mean, it's an important element in the state plan and you know, the AQMP and stuff. It just,
so
I don't know if we have some.
Maybe Phil can check with Henry. That would probably be Henry, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Can you check
Can you
with?
shoot me an email about
Yeah.
the makeup of the group? I'll talk to Jeff.
Yeah, that's a good point, thank you. Okay, Bill said thankfully we don't have anything on small business considerations. Kurt, you're here,
Yes.
You got anything on the EJ front?
Yeah, OEHA released the draft Calvin Virus Screen 3.0 update. They're using more recent data for all the indicators. They are claiming improvements in the way some indicators are calculated, in addition to some indicators to better reflect environmental conditions or population vulnerability to pollution. They added 2 new indicators on my notes here. One was rent adjusted income, and the other is heart attack rate to emergency room visits due to heart attack issues. That would further, one is socioeconomic, the other is health-related vulnerability to environmental impacts. And then they are removing the children and elderly age indicator and replacing it with an analysis of age. What they found is that those tracts that tend to have high elderly populations have very low or correspondingly low young children populations and vice versa. And that some of the tracts or a lot of the tracts that had high elderly populations, which indicated they were more at risk, tended to be very relatively affluent and maybe not as at risk. And the two, that they just seemed to counterbalance each other and ended up as being relatively equal and not as indicative to environmental impacts as they had hoped. So they've taken that out, but they're doing replacing it with an analysis of the age within each tract.
Okay, thank you for that.
And there's an information sheet about all this as well as the draft on their website.
Okay. Bill Quinn is not on the line. I'm not sure, do we have anyone from Steve? Janet, are you there? No. Okay, so I don't think we have anything on New Source Review. And on climate change, David, do you have anything for us?
Had a couple things, brought our ACE climate change reporter, Frank Capone, to report for us.
Go ahead, Frank, go on.
I can see the look on everybody's face that they want to get out of here, so I had
Another meeting I gotta get to.
a lot I was going to talk about, but I'm going to streamline it. You've already heard a lot of things about what went on in Sacramento, and so I'm not going to go over that again. SB 32 passed, but there was a companion bill to SB 32, AB 197, Garcia bill. And what this bill did is it provided a tremendous amount of oversight to the climate program for a lot of reasons. I think there was some level of distrust by the legislature of ARB. I don't know if Chris is on the phone anymore. But it adds two positions to the ARB board, 2 legislative positions, once again as legislative oversight of what ARB is doing. But and this directly impacts the Home Rule Working Group. It has several requirements. A major requirement is transparency, what they're labeling as transparency. And what this is going to do is require that they have an active website which has the emissions, criteria pollutants, greenhouse gases, and toxic pollutants from all the businesses that are in the cap and trade program listed on the website, the state website. So they want to work with the local air districts to get all this information. So this is going to be a major effort, I think.
We send it to them every year anyway, so yeah.
on that part. And that wouldn't be bad enough, but it's more than that. They want this to be informative in that they want trends of information, of this inventory information. There was a group that ARB had, it was called the Adaptive Management Group. And if you want to see Bill Quinn get red-faced, ask him about this. He served on the committee at ARB. And what adaptive management was set up to do was to determine if any of the cap and trade allowance trading or development of allowances would create any additional criteria pollutant emissions or toxic emissions. Industry thought this would go away very quickly because on the surface it didn't make any sense to even think that was going to happen. But this thing has kind of taken on a life of its own become a real EJ issue. And what's going to happen, we think, is that the adaptive management is going to get sucked into AB 197. And they're looking for ways to try to determine if businesses are putting out additional criteria pollutants, especially toxic pollutants as a result of the cap and trade program. And this, on the surface, this could become fairly dangerous. There are things that have been talked about at the adaptive management group. Once again, we think it's going to fold into 197. For example, this inventory and the trends in the inventory, they were looking at ways to say, okay, if you look at the last year or 2 years in your inventory, if your current inventory is, say, 10% above the last year's inventory, that could be an indicator that you have an increase in emissions. Not even with regard to the fact that you're well within your permit limits or anything like that, and moving towards possibly making a limit around that, an actual regulatory limit around, just say, I'm using an example, plus or minus 10% of your inventory. So this is the kind of thinking that's going on, and we, like I said, once again, we think 197 is going to probably tackle this because there'll be a committee, a panel set up to even have further oversight of all this information. So I think a lot has to be done here. Obviously, the bill was just signed a few days ago, 197, and so we have to see how this is all going to play out. I think this group is definitely going to see more of this as time goes on. And it's definitely something to keep an eye on because it's going to be a burden on the local districts to have to work with ARB to develop the statewide inventory. And once again, the bigger burden is going to be trying to develop all these trends and what they're going to do with those trends because there could be consequences. And once again, right now it's isolated to the cap and trade industries, but the concern is that if you go down a path, the slippery slope of looking at the inventory as being a regulatory limit, this now could be a slippery slope to the non-cap and trade industries too. So that I think is right now one of the bigger things to come out of the session is 197. This was originally starting to become labeled as anti-cap and trade, and the reason is because of this adaptive management element of it. So much so that Garcia wrote a letter to the legislature last week, basically saying, no, there's no way, no how that we're trying to affect the market programs. But in reality, they couldn't affect the cap and trade program by what this requires and where they're going on this. So, like I said, a lot of other things to talk about, but this is really, I think, for your group, I think one of the bigger issues.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Frank, something to talk about?
It's Assembly Bill 197, Garcia.
Something we talk about is cap and trade, and as far as the viability of the cap and trade program, to bring in money that could be utilized for different programs. Am I correct in thinking that SB 32 didn't provide as much support for cap and trade as was hoped?
SB 32 is silent on cap and trade. The reason being is because the governor really wanted SB 32 to pass. And so he had to sacrifice the cap and trade. The cap and trade program, just to amend something that was said earlier, what's under scrutiny right now is not the cap and trade program. It's the auction, the dollar value of the auction that's under scrutiny. The Cal Chamber has a lawsuit against ARB saying that the dollars that are developed in the cap and trade program are essentially a tax. And as such, it should be a 2/3 vote in order to go down that path. The governor's office has taken that very seriously because most legal opinions are that that's correct. And so they were trying to get they tried to get cap and trade as part of SB 32, but realized they could never get a 2/3 vote this year anyway. So they put it off till next year. It was mentioned there's different ways that the governor may look at this. After November, there's a chance that the legislature both houses or one of the houses of the legislature may have a supermajority, and it could be easier for them to get the cap and trade program passed. They're even looking at a potential carbon tax. And then the governor, I think as a backstop, has a proposition that he's already lined up for next November. So to answer your question, right now, I mean, the cap and trade program was part of AB 32, so that will continue till 2020. But the auctions are being impacted right now because of the uncertainty of the lawsuits
Also,
and moving
because
forward.
people have reduced their emissions, so they don't need to buy credits.
Yeah,
Which was the objective in the first place. The objective was not to generate money, the objective was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
But that cap's gonna come down and down, just like in the reclaim program, so there'll be points where people will have to buy allowances or reduce. So you will see prices go up, but right now, the last two quarterly auctions, I think, generated around $8 million each, when the projections were in the hundreds of $millions. So the state certainly wants to see that money into their coffers. So this is becoming a bigger issue.
Okay, great. Now, do we have any questions or comments on any of the subcommittee status reports? There is no energy left in this building. Okay. Report to and from stationary committee. Dr. Fine, do you have anything for us?
Just very briefly, we've had two very full stationary source committee meetings. Just refer online to the agendas unless you want me to go through them, but I am obligated to report that the stationary source committee did approve your reappointment of Jacqueline to this committee.
And she didn't show up?
And she didn't show up, but I think that
She
my
must have
legal
looked at the
obligation to
agenda.
report to the stationary source committee. But I'm happy to, go over the agendas if anyone had any.
Okay, any questions or comments on that? I missed it because I had to be out of town. Sorry about
Went
that.
into overtime.
Yeah, did it. See, those are the times that I really wish we had Dennis Yates around because it drove me crazy. We have next on our agenda is the meeting schedule. I got an email from Bill Quinn who said the last meeting and this meeting coincided with Bay Area AQMD governing board meetings, and ones in the future are also conflicting with that. I think what I'd like to propose is that maybe Ann does a survey of which Wednesday in the week works best for folks, and then coordinates with staff because of the.
Wednesday in the month.
Which Wednesday of the month that works best for folks, and how that works with our committee meetings and all that, to try to come up with a meeting schedule that, I'm not gonna change it just for Bill's schedule, but if we can't accommodate Bill and everybody else, then maybe that does work. So let's hold off on finalizing that right now, and do a survey, and we can email each other about trying to figure out what to ask in that survey.
So is November 16th firm or tentative?
I think we probably should go with November 16th, because assuming that no one has any issues or problems with that. Hold on, November 16th, yeah. You do.
Dr. Lou, even Bill Quinn, we have the CEIB fall planning session that week.
So
That's the week before
all the
Thanksgiving
seed
break.
members won't be available the
And I
week.
think there's another, I think
There's also
another
CDOG.
I was gonna have to leave here and fly up to San Francisco that day.
I may have AQMP public.
On that day too? Okay, so,
So I would suggest the 9th as opposed to the 23rd. Since people may be traveling.
Right.
let's take a look at my calendar real quick. So we have, the 23rd we are not gonna, definitely not gonna do, which would really leave the 9th. And other than having the Coalition for Clean Air auditors in the office that day. Depends. It depends. When it's good news, I'd like to be there, but why don't we take a survey on the 9th, since the 16th doesn't work for most of the members, it looks like.
And that's the day after the election now, so.
Well, that could be an interesting conversation.
I'm gonna be in DC, but I don't.
I'll be in
Okay, we're
DC
gonna,
too.
we'll, yeah.
You can handle it without.
You'll be in DC too?
I'll just call in.
I don't think we can have a remote location from out of state, but you might be able to listen in.
There you go.
Okay, so can we do that? Can we survey
Can we
the
look at
entire,
November 2nd too?
everyone? What's that?
Can you look at Wednesday, November 2nd too?
November 2nd would be right before the board meeting, which is not a good day for me, I can guarantee.
Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at the 9th and the 16th, do a poll, and then we'll decide on which way to handle that, okay? And then the overall schedule, we'll just have a general question also about which Wednesday of the month works best for you. So any questions or comments on item number 12, given that we're not really dealing with it? Okay. 13 is the mission and statement. I'm gonna ask that we defer this till next meeting. Put it earlier in the agenda so we actually get to it, because we just don't have time. I'm gonna be late to it in my next meeting. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Good. Other business?
I think we need to change Philip Fine's tag to Dr. Philip Fine.
Dr. Phil Fine.
Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil Fine.
There you go.
I would just suggest that.
I was gonna change it to Dr. Phil Ultrafine, but.
The
PM
chairman,
fine.
the chairman, I think, normally has control over the agenda, and I would suggest you look into putting EPA and CARB at the top, or maybe right after the minutes before you
Yeah.
do all the staff
Yeah,
presentations.
no, I agree. And can you make a note of that? We'd like to move ARB and EPA up in the agenda. Are there any other agenda items of importance that we need to get to in November? If so, please let Ann know. Public comment? Okay. Thank you for your patience, your perseverance, and for coming. We are adjourned.
Thank you for lunch.
We have a lot of bonds on the ballot. A lot of that stuff is gonna deal with AC units.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we
great.
have a lot of the stuff we gotta do is electrical.
Uh-huh.
There's a.
If you're doing your HVAC units, then you should talk to the folks at IQ Air, because they're the ones that do the filters that we've been working with.
Well, what I'm looking at
Would
is,
check with them.
how do we deal, because I'm looking at a solar project now in the
Uh-huh.
city with Anaheim
Yeah,
on 2 schools.
yeah.
But I'm also looking at, we're looking at lighting programs that gets us regulation 124 or something that requires different lighting requirements. And also the incentives for AC, because as we all get our money, all that stuff will be implemented during the summer. So we have about a 4-month window.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Seeing you. Doing good?
Yeah, well, the last one I didn't, I didn't realize it changed the date on it.
I do have it, but then I'll make sure we have that.
For a long time. I forget to look at the second email.
We got another meeting. Looks like, if you ask me, it looks like it's an EFMP plus up meeting, maybe, or EFMP meeting. Suspicious characters in the room.
One look.
Yeah. Just gotta check.
Nice to see you.
No, but $75. Yeah, Volkswagen, you know, they had a lease special.
Sure.
$2,500 at least $65 a month. So the tax and everything came up to $75.40. Oh, sorry, here, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just we're
They
getting
had
pushed out of that meeting.
Oh, yeah, we get moved out fast.
Yeah.
No, it was like a Volkswagen. It's in the state.
Oh.
Yeah. That's right. So these are ones.
No, because they lied.
Okay,
I
thank
know
you.
it.
Pay attention.
Yeah, that's
Trying to
right.
see it.
Which had to come over $2,500.
$2,500 down.
Sorry.
So tax and license came up to like 31. And so the total payoff for 2 years was $5,900. Oh, legit. You guys were way beyond our
Thank you for the,
Yeah, so great to see you.
It's been a while. I'm gonna go sit in there.
Okay.
I'll be on Zoom.
Okay.
If I didn't ask something, you would have never seen it.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
The whole thing in there, that way I can summarize it.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah.
Did we?
And then I just.
No, we did in the auditorium.
That's where we, some of the. We good?
All right, back here.
Okay, so throw that in there too.
Where would you like us to sit? Here?
Let's
find it. Okay. Hey, Oscar.
How you doing? Good to see you.
It's Oscar,
Yes,
right?
of course.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you guys.
Did you want the clicker?
Give it to her.
Good to see you. Is he doing okay?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. This is Lisa. Aura?
Or she stopped the recording.
Top shelf.
Oh, yeah, I'm Nick Member, I'm with the ARB.
Oh, nice to
Team
meet you.
lead
Nice
for
to meet you. Perfect. Yes, yes, yes. Important to a group boss. That's right.
Nick used to be with EPA.
Was it headquartered?
Yeah, in DC, yeah.
DC, oh,
Yeah, I was with the chemical aspect of it. Slightly different than this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, I think there's room at the table.
Did you put Jimmy on time out or what?
I don't know, he just decided to sit back
Not
there.
behaving or what?
It was his choice.
Right, Jordan?
You came a long way.
Hey, let me welcome everybody. This is the.
Excuse us, because of the last meeting going long, I need to just shut down for a quick second.
I'm not saying anything confidential. Yeah.
Not your fault, not ours. He was standing out in the hall with us.
We're good to go. We're good to go.
Okay. So I want to welcome everybody to this EFMP Bidders Conference. Maybe we should go around and introduce everybody. My name is Dean Seidel, and I manage the On-Road Strategies Unit, which is responsible for implementing the Replace Your Ride Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program. And
I'm Niranjan Vesia. I'm with Opus Inspection. We're one of the 3 current contractors in the FMP program.
I'm Jim Sands. I'm with Opus as well.
I'm Nick Narberts. I'm with ARB. I'm the team lead for the EFMP program.
My name's Jim Mendez. I'm with LKQ Pick Your Point.
Joanne Golden Stewart, I'm with Gladstein Neanders and Associates, and we did a lot of the marketing and branding efforts for EFMP.
Oscar Abarca with Top Shelf Environmental Consulting.
Annalisa Abarca with Top Shelf Environmental Consulting.
Wei, I work with Dean Day Lord.
Lori Gerard, AQMD staff.
Jimmy Goodkin, also with Office Inspection.
Angelica Enriquez, AQMD staff.
All right, AQMD technical staff.
Edie Seiler, Director of Environmental Programs at the Foundation for California Community Colleges.
Rosa Alloway with the Foundation for California Community Colleges, and I'm one of the case managers.
Dave Cole, AQMD staff on road section.
Okay, so basically we've, let me give a sort of a background and status of where we are with the program. We beta started this program back in May of 2015, and to date we've probably processed around 1,000 vouchers. As many of you know, last week the governor signed a bill which provides additional funding for the EFMP program. I think I'm going to ask Nick to talk about that a little bit later.
Sure.
So we anticipate that we'll be receiving more plus-up funding for this program. But irrespective of that, we were planning on some changes to the EFMP program. One of the things we've learned in the last year and a half with this program is that there's a real demand from consumers to be able to identify the status of their application, and I think the preference is that they can check the status of their application online. We are going before our governing board next month with a request to develop a new website with a new application process where consumers can interact and identify the status of their application, but really more importantly is the ability to create a database in which we can produce reports from this database. As many of you can imagine, there's a lot of interest in this program from the elected officials. And every week we get requests from elected officials wanting to know how many of their constituents are on the waiting list or have been issued vouchers to make sure their constituents are participating in this program. So we've been having to create this database virtually by hand every week, asking for input from each of our contractors and putting together a database. And you know, what we're going to try to do is streamline the program, make it more efficient, have this website create this database where we can create reports when we're requested by elected officials. And so we'll be in the process of working with our contractor, developing the website and the database in the next 3 months. We hope to have this new website and application procedure online in early next year. So we'll be busy working with the contractor to develop that database and website. I want to introduce Nick. I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's hyphenated, it's tough. Naren Birch, it's 2 words.
Naren Birch, okay. And Nick is with ARB in the Almani office, and Nick is the lead person for ARB on the EFMP program. And Nick, maybe you can give a sort of a summary of the of what ARB intends to do with the regulation and the funding. Give
Sure.
us a background on that.
Yeah, so perhaps all of you know there are 2 funding sources. There's what we call the BASE program, and it's where this program originated, the EFMP Retire and Replace, and was created by AB 118, and there's a regulation that sets out the guidelines. And sort of built on top of that, there is the EFMP Plus Up, which is money that comes from a separate funding source, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which places an emphasis on advanced technology replacement to get the climate change co-benefits. And originally that funding source was meant to sort of match the funding source of the BASE program, but it's grown quite significantly in the 3 fiscal years that this money has been provided for the program. So This current fiscal year, AB 1613, the governor, sorry, not the governor, signed it. The legislature finally gave us the money for EFMP Plus Up, and is providing 60 million, at least 60 million. There's 80 million total, 20 million of which will be going to other, what they're calling the equity pilot projects. So we anticipate, and we're assuming all that 20 million will go to those projects, and we'll get 60 million for EFMP. The base program is getting this year 7.4 million total, 3.7 to each district, which is a little bit higher than it has been in the past. But clearly it's Plus Up is the majority of the money. So we haven't officially gone out with to the public and said how we're going to be dividing that money, but it's we originally thought it was going to be 30 million for Plus Up, and under that plan we said we'd give the existing districts, being South Coast and San Joaquin Valley, 10 million each, and then 10 million would be left over for any new districts that want to open up an EFMP program. We think now that we're going to up that with the 60 million, we're going to guarantee the 15 million up front for each existing district. We're going to still keep 10 million for any new districts, and then we're going to reserve 20 million as sort of what we're calling, first come, first serve, meaning in 6 months or 8 months or so, we'll check in with all the existing districts and new districts, see how they're doing, and then provide money on based on who needs it the most. So we anticipate a lot of that will go to South Coast and San Joaquin Valley. Sure. But that hasn't been officially approved by our board. We go to the board October 20th. We don't anticipate there'll be many changes to that. That's our plan now. That's our proposed plan. We'll have a work group for that. The notice hasn't gone out yet. We have to wait for the notice to go out for the actual board meeting, but that will go out to discuss this plan. And that will be tentatively, we're looking at October 5th at 3:30 p.m., although that's not official yet. We'll send out the notice. And so that money for Plus Up, base program should be anytime, and Plus Up should be available by the end of the year.
Right.
Calendar year, not fiscal year.
So as you can see, this upcoming year, we're going to have a lot more funding available. And I think the number of vouchers that's being anticipated is virtually, at the very least, is going to be double. And so it's going to be critical that we streamline this program, make it more efficient, in order for us to be able to handle twice as many voucher awards and applications. And so, I think the process of developing our own website with an interactive application procedure is critical, but so is the marketing and outreach of the program. And I think that's one of the things that we're really going to have to raise the level in order to get the participation, in order to expend that kind of dollars. So I'm going to ask Lori to do a brief presentation about the RFP and some of the program changes, and then basically open it up for questions. And Lori?
Okay, this is going to be really a brief overview, and so many of you here know so many more of the details about the program. But so yeah, the basics of this program, for those who might not be familiar with it is a voluntary program to scrap or replace a vehicle. Another option besides replacing a vehicle is obtaining a transit pass. And this program, even though fleet, it's under the Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program, fleet vehicles are not eligible for participation. It's fleet in a different sense. And vehicles that are registered to businesses or nonprofits are not eligible. But it is available to those with low or moderate income, those at or below 400% of federal poverty level. And we offer between $4,000 and $9,500 for our incentives. And the incentives are based on different variables, depends on the income category, the type of replacement vehicle that's selected, and the more advanced technologies are given, for those we give higher incentive levels, and then also whether the participant is in a disadvantaged community or not. So as Dean indicated, we had really good participation rates with our program, higher than anticipated, and so it's been very successful. And we even have had a waiting list and quite a few people on the waiting list. So we're pretty excited about that and continuing to move forward because there is a continued interest in the program. And so as indicated in the RFP, there are some different tasks that we're asking for those who are interested in proposing how they would plan to do the tasks and what the proposed cost would be. Dean was mentioning that we're looking to streamline our efforts, and there probably are some people who will be submitting proposals who have some good ideas of how we can streamline or how we can refine what's already being done. Certainly, from an internal standpoint, there's a lot of updating we need to do with our procedures, but in the RFP, if people have some good ideas of specifically what we can do, that would always be welcome, because as Dean indicated, if we're going to do twice the number of vouchers, but only in, say, 12 months' time, we really need to be very productive, and we need to be very effective. And so as far as the tasks go, as you know, a large part of the work is the case management efforts of really walking the participants through the process. And I know there's some people here who are extraordinary experts on dealing with these participants, walking them through all of the details of the program. And so that's going to continue to be a big emphasis. It's absolutely imperative that we have good case management for that. And likewise, we're going to continue with remote sensing of vehicles so that for those who aren't able to provide us with emissions data on the vehicles that they're going to retire, this remote sensing is a great opportunity for people to easily just go to an event, get their vehicle tested as they drive through, get the emissions tested, and then we'll continue to work with dealerships. We'll probably be contracting, AQND will probably be contracting directly with the dealerships and the financial institutions, etc. But nevertheless, the contractors, I know they develop a relationship with our partners here, and all of that is critical in order for this all to run smoothly. And then outreach support, of course, is very important, and we're going to be relying upon that as needed. As participation wanes, we need to get more in order to make our 2,000 vouchers. That's going to be critical as well. With respect to the outreach, we need to make sure that we have broad participation throughout all of South Coast jurisdiction. So we cover 4 counties, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino, as well as some other areas, the Salton Sea area. Our actual boundaries go out pretty far, and we just need to make sure that we're having some good, somewhat uniform coverage. And of course, we're reaching out to the low and middle income consumers, and especially those who are identified by ARB as being in disadvantaged communities. And we will continue with what is currently being offered, where we're offering, periodically we offer Saturday events where there is outreach performed, reaching out to those in the disadvantaged communities, and then at the same time we've been offering them remote sensing so they can get the vehicle that they want to retire, they can get that emissions tested, and we can sort of then we also have case management there on hand. So it's really a good opportunity for people to submit their applications, get assistance, get their car tested, and then they're moving forward on the process.